looks like we have about half the commission here. I don't know where everybody else is. I think Charlie said he's going to call in until he gets to a computer. So.
Okay. Well, I think we're ready to get started. We got, I think, a quorum at least to get started, but we'll go through the intro here and then call roll and then get started. So, all right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Cronin, City Engineer in the Municipal Services and Operations Department, and I will be facilitating the Zoom video portion of the meeting this evening. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and public access channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, I may mute or unmute people as needed. Each time you speak, please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on during the meeting. If you are participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. And so now I'll turn over the meeting to the chair, Commissioner Kuzmyak.
Thanks, Dave. Well, there's not too much for me to introduce at this point, except for that we are going to start with our study session. The subject for this particular meeting is going to be the transportation-related projects that are in the 2021 Capital Improvement Program, or CIP. It would be good to just make sure that we're all on the same page of what we mean when we talk about CIP, because when the City Commission is speaking, their CIP covers all capital projects that are forecasted for the next 5 years or so. When we talk about CIP, it sometimes refers to that one, but it also can refer to our sort of, almost sub-CIP that's specifically for non-motorized projects. That's all of our bike and ped projects that we've actually spent quite a few meetings over the past 6 months going through scoring and prioritization of those. For the purposes of this meeting, I believe, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in this case that CIP really just refers to overall capital improvement projects for the whole city, and the transportation related projects that are in that one for 2021.
Correct.
So,
yep, Dave Cronin, City Engineer, correct. Tonight we're going to discuss the projects in the city-wide capital improvement plan for the 2021 next year, to give, a heads up to projects that will be coming next year up for discussion in front of this this board. I would take one step back, and I think we will. I'll have Allie go ahead and call roll for the study session portion, if that's all right, and then I'll get started.
Cool.
Okay. Allie Weems, MSO. If you hear your name, please say "I present." Anything? Okay. Catherine Schwartz, or Schartz. Okay. Lauren Freeman.
Present.
Thomas Allen.
Present.
Charlie Bryan. Donna Holtine. Steve Evans. Carol Bowen.
Present.
Nick Kuzmyak.
Present.
And Aaron Payton.
Present.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. And again, tonight for the study session, we're going to talk about 2021 CIP projects. And I know there's some folks on here that are signed up to speak for agenda items during the regular meeting. which will start at 6 o'clock. So just a heads up for those that are tuned in here, and that we're going to go over the study session here for the first hour of the meeting. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can scroll through some of the projects here that are attached to the agenda. What I did was on the agenda went through and took the project information sheets. Let's see here. There we go. All right. Yep. All right, so I'm going to share here my screen with some of the projects we're going to talk about that are coming up here next year, and feel free to chime in with any questions you have, and maybe we can have a stopping point on each one and then discuss if there's any questions.
I have a quick question before you begin. Could you zoom in a little bit, please? Just a couple clicks should do it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Sure. Again, Dave Cronin, City Engineer, the MSO Department. This first project, Green Pavement Intersection Crossings, this was a project that was a citizen request project to install green pavement markings at crossings between of our bikeways and streets and driveways. So it's $382,000 next year to make improvements for this green pavement intersection crossing project. And we need to, certainly with, the large number of crossings that we do have, we will need to come up with some methodology and criteria on how to prioritize this money to these improvements. So this is going to be a relatively new thing as far as a program goes, or as far as a project goes, I would say. For a comprehensive project to do this amount of pavement markings, we've done some green pavement markings on Mass Street with the buffered bike lane project that was constructed a few years ago by South Park. And so, this will be something that will be looking for some guidance on prioritizing these funds next year to do this project. So we're going to probably early on in the year get in touch with a consultant to help us deliver this project, come up with some metrics to prioritize the budget, and complete the project next year. So is there any questions from any of the commissioners on this project?
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I had a couple of questions, if you don't mind. The first one is, so it looks like the funding source and expenditures perfectly match. So the total cost of the project is $382,000. Since there's so many conflict points and places where this paint might go in, does, I guess, the project as stated cover all of those, or does it just cover as many as you could with the budget that you were allotted?
Well, the Dave Cronin, City Engineer, it will be as many as we can complete with the budget allotted. So I don't know if we, this was a citizen request, in here it says there's at least 151 conflict points, which I'm sure there's at least that many, if not more, but we have not come up with the number of conflict points, crossings, or the amount of pavement markings it would take to mark all of the conflict points in Lawrence. So the project would be to prioritize within the budget the conflicts that are probably the most needed.
That makes sense. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. How did you come up with the budget? Is that just 100% of the infrastructure sales tax for a year? It seems oddly arbitrary.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Again, this was a citizen request, and I think the assumptions based off of the number of conflict points in the description with the price of $15 per square foot yielded the $382,000.
So it sounds like it then does go for all the conflict points that are there, not just the ones that you can cover with the budget. I guess I'm just kind of confused if there's a limiting factor here. It doesn't sound like there's a limiting factor if the budget was generated based on how many conflict points are believed to exist.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. These are estimates on here, so we would need to understand the number of conflict points, what that number is, and what the price to install the pavement marking is. I don't know if this is included traffic control that is needed. So I think we need to do a little more review and engineering on the number of conflict points and the cost for each one. So we have not started our review of this yet, but it will be coming up here early on next year. So
Okay. Sounds like it's kind of up in the air then still, and that we don't entirely know, I guess, what the budget needs to be or exactly how many things need to be painted, but this is kind of the best guess in the meantime.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Yeah, it's the information that we have from the request that was approved in the CIP.
Oh, so the budget was a part of the request? I guess I didn't catch that at first.
Correct.
Interesting.
Dave Cronin.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Owen, Commissioner, how are the conflict points determined?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. We have not determined them yet. This was a citizen request that estimated there are 151 conflict points with where bikeways cross driveways and streets. We have not validated if that is the number of conflict points that exist or not.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. So if I remember correctly, this came from Michael Ullman originally, is that right?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I believe he's the one that submitted the request.
Okay. And I see that, Michael, you're on the call. So I don't know if now is the right time, but we may want to pick your brain for a little bit if there's time left at the end of this study session. Assuming the Michael I see is, okay, yep, that's the right one. Okay, sounds good. That's all the questions I had for this. Any other commissioners have anything to add for the green pavement markings?
This is Commissioner Charlie Bryan. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure I understand what we're doing tonight. For the study session, David, are you just walking through each of the CIP projects that have already been approved?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I think as an added bonus, sorry, thank you, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I think as an added bonus, if we see any sort of patterns or overarching themes or questions about these, it may be good to have them all presented like this to generate any discussion that we might have over overall transportation-related projects.
Okay, Dave Cronin, city engineer. I'll go ahead and move on to the next project. I think most of you are familiar with this, 19th Street, Harper to O'Connell, which we had in the CIP last year for design. Design is continuing, and next year, 2021, moving forward with construction on the project. So right now we are working on preliminary design plans for the street based off of the approved set 27-foot street width. We will bring back those plans early next year, prior to completing the plans and bidding out the project. So again, this is reconstructing of the street between Harper and O'Connell. It also includes completion of the sidewalk between Haskell and Harper, and the street, and then a new water line. So those plans will be shared here as soon as we're have our field check set ready to share. If there's no questions on that, I'll move on to the next project. Again, this is a project we've discussed before, but East 23rd Street, Haskell to the east city limits. Reconstructing that section of roadway over the next 2 years, 2021 and 2022. We are currently working on design plans. We are tentatively scheduled to bring our 30% design plans before you at the December 7th meeting. So that's on our calendar for future meetings. This is a project that we had a lot of public involvement last year to discuss the, or I guess it was end of 2019 to discuss the different considerations with the project as far as access goes and bike facilities and landscaping and lighting, and produced a summary report that we did through the that MPO study that those that were on the MMTC probably remember. So that this project's in design and moving forward here for you to review as soon as next month. Any questions on 23rd Street? Hearing none, I will move on. Wakarusa, Research Parkway to 23rd Street. This project's in the CIP next year for design and construction in 2022. We have constructed several sections of Wakarusa from just north of Harvard down to, excuse me, Research Parkway over the past five or 6 years. This would essentially extend that down to 23rd Street. I would note that, the sections to the north, we did include on-street bike lanes. We'll have a conversation on whether or not that would be appropriate for this section. I would say, based off of what I would expect to see for speed and volume on Wakarusa, that would not fit our level of comfort for on-street bike lanes with our new bikeway plan, but we will certainly review that and present our recommendation on that to you with the design. So this is probably the, after we just talked about 19th and 23rd Street, the next large reconstruction of an arterial street we have in the community that's planned. So I guess I would pause here for any questions from any commissioners.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I'm I know we're going to probably talk about this another time when you present plans, but it does seem to me like the last several years, the work that's been done on Wakarusa Drive has taken a particular approach that does involve the bike lanes. And this section of the road is only another like 3 or 4 blocks long. Seems to me important to just maintain the same character that we've previously rebuilt or reconstructed Wakarusa with. Just my thoughts on this. Especially for anybody that's actually using this, it seems rather abrupt to end it.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. So, Charlie, I think you're a lot more familiar with this area than I am, but every time I drive Wakarusa, if there's a cyclist, they're always in the sidewalk, which they are within their rights to be, but it seems like kind of a waste of a bike lane, honestly. We could be doing something more, I guess, encouraging, like separated bike lanes or buffered bike lanes or something like that.
No, they use both. They use both. This is Commissioner Bryan. People use both facilities.
That's good.
It depends on your comfort level.
Yeah. I mean, I'd certainly be on the bike lane, but most people I know who are sort of iffy on biking would probably not use it just because it is kind of a higher speed road. I think at least from my point of view, this seems like one of those areas where there's an opportunity to start to add, I mean, if you're pessimistic, you could say add complexity. If you're optimistic, you could say add features and amenities that are helpful to people. Seems like it could be a good opportunity to add those, kind of like was done on East 19th Street, Queens Road, East 23rd Street, instead of just kind of keeping the status quo. And I guess that kind of leads into another question I have. The useful life shown on the CIP is 50 years. I'm not from here, and I don't recall anything of the history really before maybe 10 or 20 years ago. How old is Wakarusa Drive in its current state? Because as far as I've heard, Monterey used to be kind of the kind of western boundary of Lawrence, but I don't know if that was the 60s or 70s. So I'm just wondering, is Wakarusa Drive already 50 years old?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I'm going to take a guess, but I think it was the late 70s, between maybe 75 and 80 when it was improved. And I would say it wasn't really built to the standards that we would build them to today, that it was asphalt on an old county road or on dirt and didn't have the subgrade treatment that we need. And so it may be 40-ish years already. But you know, and I would say we put in useful life of 50 years. I don't know if there's a number we can put higher than 50 when we submit these requests. But when we build these streets, we hope that they last for longer than 50. But yeah, it's certainly you know, if you've been out there, it needs to be redone, similar to other sections. Yeah, we would like to see 50 plus years out of it when it's improved. So I would step back and say, you know, just generally on our capital improvement plan, we've kind of talked about the citizen input project, and we've talked about a couple other projects. A little bit about the capital improvement planning process is that staff will submit these projects. You know, usually that begins early in the year, February, March, April. We'll submit projects in these plan sheets that include descriptions and pictures and estimated costs. And we also do a citizen input request. That first project, the green pavement marking, was a citizen input request that can also be considered as part of the CIP. And this last year, there was a scoring system that was used to help prioritize or rank all of the projects. And so that's kind of just a little bit that I probably should have added when I started, but just another note. And we've also, you'll see on here, we kind of split the projects out by year. So this is design in 2021 and construction in 2022. I'm going to go back to my screen share here. So here on the project sheet, there will also be an associated project that would be MS-22, which would be the construction phase. So this just shows you, we had an estimated $400,000 for planning and design next year, and we try to split it up so that we do the design in the year previous to the year that we have in for construction. So.
Thanks for the explanation. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I had a couple more kind of minor questions to round out my understanding of this one. And the first is due to my lack of understanding of this particular project. I don't remember seeing this one before in our previous meetings. How long has this been in the works? And has it come before MMTC before? And I've just, completely missed it.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. This project has been in the CIP for a few years. At least two, if not three. So I don't know if we've previously talked about longer range projects. Like tonight, we're not talking about, hey, this is what's coming up in year 22 through 25. But this would be one of those projects that was in the CIP a few years ago, and it is now, we are now moved up to the year which we originally planned to do it. I would say that projects do move around from year to year. So you could have a project right now that's, slated for 2023, and then priorities change. So that's, one of the reasons we do this capital improvement plan process every year, is that it also can reprioritize the project. So this one, I believe, has consistently been in 2021. It may have moved around a few years ago, but I think it's one that we've anticipated needing to get done after we took care of East 23rd Street. So it's kind of the next one in the line based off of the PCI.
Okay.
This is Commissioner. As I say, this is Commissioner Bryan. Yeah, this work on Wakarusa has been going on for quite a few years. There were also 2 roundabouts that were built on Wakarusa. And so this is kind of like a last piece of that reconstruction work, as I understand it. Which kind of gets to the, in the middle of all this, we're shifting gears with how we design the roadway. And I think we got to be thoughtful about that. David, I was curious, were the sidewalks that are on the more recently constructed part of Wakarusa, are those sidewalks or are those shared use paths?
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. Those are sidewalks. There's 2 6-foot sidewalks on each side.
Thank you. This is Commissioner Bryan. I was thinking that, I don't know if if the new standard would call for those to be shared use paths, but I think that would be an acceptable kind of path forward if we're not going to continue the design north on Wakarusa. I think the volume of activity on the bike lane and the sidewalk, when combined, would make sense to have a shared use path there.
Okay, Dave Cronin, city engineer. Yeah, we'll be having those conversations on appropriate bike facility and how to tie it in next year with design. And I'd say we need to look at the intersection treatment there with Research Parkway and Wakarusa right now. It's a four-legged intersection, and so that might be appropriate for some traffic control at that intersection, whether it be a roundabout or a signal. So that'll be something that we look at as well. I would also note the Commissioner Bryan, on your note regarding the other sections of Wakarusa that we have rebuilt, that we still Feel the need to rebuild Wakarusa from 6th Street to Harvard. We did kind of an, I would say, emergency or unscheduled maintenance project on it last year to mill and overlay it to keep it getting by since it's was in some failing shape. So I think that's in one of the outer years of the CIP to design and reconstruct. It's a shorter segment. And then as we continue to have discussions with the K10 Wakarusa interchange, and as KDOT hopefully moves forward to building that, hopefully in the next 5 years, tying that section of Wakarusa from 23rd Street to K10 into this, everything that we've done to the north of there will be important. So, but yeah, we've done a few projects on Wakarusa and got maybe a couple more to go, but this is really the next priority that we see.
Carol Bowen,
Oh, sorry.
So what I'm hearing is this project's going to happen. Is that right?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Nothing's for certain until it happens. So we are planning to move forward with the design next year in 2021 and then construction in 2022. So that's what, sorry, go ahead.
And if it's already in the works, I'm not interested in going backwards. I want to keep thinking forward. As we look at these projects, I'm thinking to myself, what do we want and what do we need? And if we looked at all our arterials, does this one rank higher than some of the other arterials that need work? Those are my questions. And I think when we start looking at the ranking that we were doing, I want to look at the outcomes. I want to see if there are other arterials that are needier, or if this is a want. I don't know, because you have a score of 52, but I don't know what's in that score.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too, actually. Is this the same score that we're using for the non-motorized prioritization, or is this a completely different one that applies to the entire city's CIP? And if so, can we see kind of under the hood eventually?
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. The PCI scores the pavement condition index, and that's not related to the any of the bike ped projects. It's more condition of the pavement. And we are kind of re-looking at the way we approach street rating, and we last year went out and drove all of the streets in Lawrence and are compiling that information. And we're going to do some deflection testing here this fall to give us some more data to help prioritize streets going forward. So this is, in the past, this PCI has been a pretty good indicator of the condition of the street that we've used to base our recommendations on. And we're trying to enhance that here going forward. And we've, the discussion on asset management is really the key player to that. And we're trying to get more data and make more strategic recommendations. So it's going to be an evolving process, but right now I believe this information is online. The last ratings of the streets. If not, we could provide that information to you. Some of it, the ratings are a little old. We have not rated the streets the last few years, waiting on this more comprehensive approach that we're taking. But
I think that Carol may have been asking about the score of 52 as well. I know that's what I was curious about, because there's a score listed on the other projects as well that's not a PCI.
Okay, Dave Cronin, city engineer. Thank you for bringing that up. I was looking at the PCI, but those are unrelated. So I think the 50. They're both, well, the PCI is 51.8 which is, thought that's what you meant by 52, but the score is the score of the project and the prioritization scoring process that was done.
Carol
This is-
Bowman, Commissioner. When we look at these things, I don't know that I really want all the gritty detail, but the highlights of why it ranked the way it did. Also, is it appropriate to add equity to this rating
Dave,
in the future?
oh, sorry. Dave Cronin, city engineer. I believe equity was one of the criteria that was in the evaluation of the scoring. And I could, might be able to find that here, but there was a number of things that were included in the scoring matrix for the scoring that I could share with you here. Maybe if we can get through these, I could bring that up.
Carol, it appears to be a part of the scoring system. I found it on the city's website. I think the question remains, though, are all projects from the entire CIP scored on the same score, or are they broken down by department or who they serve or what?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. They're all the projects entered by all the departments, all the CIP projects are given a score, and that's a starting point for discussion of the recommendations of the plan. So it's they're all scored based off the same criteria, and I believe those are all online under city budget and CIP.
Okay, thanks.
The next project is our annual Sidewalk Bike Ped Improvement Program that you're familiar with. So next year we have $675,000 that this is what we call that Bike Ped Program money that we just worked on our 21 to 25 CIP for this program. That $1 million intergovernmental state grant that shows up in there, that's just a placeholder for if we get grants. We were submitting some transportation alternative grant applications to KDOT to get Safe Routes to School and Lawrence Loop grants, and so that's more of a placeholder for upfronting those monies if we do get them. But I think the projects in the plan next year include construction of the Lawrence Loop from Peterson to Michigan, and Safe Routes to School, and I think the Naismith 19th to 23rd Street project. And those are projects that we reviewed a few months ago, I think in August, as part of that 21 to 25 CIP plan, just for that allocation of funds. That's the non-motorized project prioritization. This ADA ramp improvement, these are funds that are, I included this because these were funds that were in that bike ped allocation that we split out to improve the sidewalk ramps in the areas that we're doing our Sidewalk Improvement Program in. We're going to be talking about the Sidewalk Improvement Program next month. Lawrence Loop Trail routing and design was $150,000 in the CIP to continue studying sections of the loop. I think we need to look at reviewing the section between Santa Fe Depot on 7th Street to Constant Park. And then there's going to be a section, after we complete the section from Peterson Road to Michigan, there's a section from Michigan to LMH, or the Sandra Shaw Trail, I believe it is, there at 4th and Main. So there's 2 gaps there that I think are going to be the next priorities of the loop to study, and so that's in the CIP for next year. Any questions on that project? And then the 27th Street Extension project, there between the youth sports complex and Mutt Run Dog Park that we've talked a little bit about, and have formed a steering committee to review the design and improvements for that if we proceed with the project, is in the budget next year for construction. And so we this went to the City Commission a couple weeks ago, and we're moving forward with issuing the RFQ for consultant services for public engagement and concept design, and anticipate selecting a consultant by the end of the year, and then getting started on the community engagement early next year, first of the year. And that's all of the projects that are included in the agenda item. I would also note that it's not a CIP project that's identified in the CIP, but we have I think it's $250,000 in the neighborhood traffic management program next year as well, that will come before you to proceed with a recommendation on how to spend those funds. So, this year we're doing some education, moving forward with the 25 mile per hour speed limit, and the cost to install those signs. And then next year we'll be looking to prioritize those funds. Probably going to allocate some to enforcement of speed limits, and probably a little more to education, and maybe some to engineering, where we need to do more permanent improvements for traffic calming. But that's another project that wasn't on the list that you should anticipate seeing next year. With that, is there any questions from anyone? We have about 15 minutes left, so if you wanted to get public comment, and I think Mr. Allman's on here, we could do that.
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Yeah, let's start with public comment. I don't know if anybody's actually signed up for it, but so I guess I'll check that first. Has anybody officially signed up?
There was no one signed up.
Okay.
Officially.
In that case, I would like to let Michael Allman speak for a few minutes on the citizen-generated project, just to kind of give us a bit of a background, and I guess how you see this project potentially taking shape.
Hi, good evening. This is Michael Allman. Thanks for the opportunity, and I hope I can provide information that'll be useful. If I may, I'd like to share my screen, if I'm enabled to do that. Yeah, okay. That document there shows the methodology of how we arrived at the budget we did and the scope of the project. We went through the entire map of the city, for all the SUPs and all the bicycle trails that we could spot and where they cross to any major any intersections of streets and major commercial driveways. So this is just, for instance, the SLT trail south of Lawrence by the Arboretum, the softball fields, along Clinton Parkway, going north to East 902, all these different streets that the SLT trail crosses. We calculated how many bars, for instance, the crossing will consist of various bars that are 10 feet long and 2 feet wide. We came up with a square foot total and then multiplied that by $15 a square foot. And the $15 a square foot was the figure kind of mid-range that MSO, we consulted with MSO, and they said that the price of the methyl, I can't think of what the MMT material.
Methyl methacrylate.
Yeah. Ranges between $9 and $27. And so we just went with $15. That's not, a hard and fast figure, of course. The bid process will determine how much per square foot that's going to cost. And I should say that covers both labor and material. It does not cover traffic control like David Cronin mentioned. So that would have to be figured in. So the total $382,000 was based on $15 a square foot, labor and materials. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks. Looks like you guys certainly did a lot of work. I'm assuming this is a Sustainability Action Network?
Sustainability Action Network, yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for the explanation. I'm going to open the floor up to other commissioners at this point for just general comments on the CIP. Lauren?
I actually just had a quick question. I'm curious if staff or Michael knows how long that the green pavement lasts and when it would need to be repainted.
This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. That's a good question. We don't know how long. Sometimes it depends on the pavement you apply it to and the condition it's in, and I think that's going to be something that we need to consider when we are prioritizing these areas too. And we don't want to put down the pavement marking on asphalt that needs to be redone or concrete that needs to be redone because it's not going to last very long. So that too is going to factor into the recommendation of proceeding with the project. And there may need to be some maintenance that needs to be done on these areas ahead of the pavement marking, and we've experienced that a little bit on the Bicycle Boulevard project where we needed to do some additional mill and overlay on areas before we put down pavement marking. So that's a good point, but I think long term we need to not only plan for the cost of these improvements, but budget for maintaining them in the future, because they're not, if they have a life cycle of 10 years per se, you need to budget this much money to redo them in 10 years, if that's the average life cycle of them. So the ones on Massachusetts streets have been down now for 2 years, and they're still doing pretty well. But yeah, we need to kind of look into that a little more on life cycle costs. So.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. That leads into a question that I had, and this comes up in other commissions as well, especially planning and Parks and Rec, and even just the city commission. But in the CIP, there's a little box at the bottom of each project that says budget impact / other. And for every project except for the green paint, it says this project will have no impact on the operational budget in the future. And I guess not knowing exactly what those terms connote, it sounds to me like it's saying yep, once we pay this capital cost, there's anything left to pay, which is not necessarily true because maintenance is a thing. I guess the question is, if it comes from a completely different budget, is that what justifies being able to say that these projects won't have any impact on the budget in the future? Or do we just not have any idea what the maintenance is going to cost?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I think on some projects we have an idea on the maintenance cost, but I would say on most we don't or haven't planned. I know, particularly with buildings and roofs and air conditioning units and all that sort of stuff, we need to start planning for the maintenance costs. On some of the road projects, yeah, it's hard to say. You're already maintaining a road. If you're reconstructing it in a similar fashion and width, there's probably not a lot of additional operating costs. But I think we're, again, that ties back into asset management as we've been trying to identify, like, what's the cost of all of our assets? What's the cost to maintain them? Project. So it's something I think we need to do more work on. And that's, as we've discussed bike facilities, and when we build new shared use paths, if we're that weren't there before, those are paths that our Parks and Rec staff maintains as far as snow plowing and the condition of them. And so we need to try to keep moving forward with identifying, the operational costs of those. So I would generally answer your question by saying we haven't been as consistent on that in the past, but we're mindful of it going forward.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. I certainly appreciate your honesty, and it's good to hear that the city is moving forward with trying to get a better grip on what those maintenance costs are. I think part of the reason I'm particularly interested in them is that in talks over, say, East 19th Street, there was a bit of a discussion over what the maintenance implications are of having a larger road or having more features or having more difficult to access landscaping. And I think there is a limited budget and finite resources. So it'd be really good to judge a project not just on its capital costs, but certainly on the operation and maintenance as well. So that's certainly encourage staff to continue working on trying to figure out what the costs over time are of these projects, so we can kind of get the full scope of what they are. So thanks for the explanation. Carol?
On the 27th Street project at the soccer fields, I haven't been out there for a very long time, so tell me if I don't know what I'm talking about. But when I was reading about it, it did not make sense to invest in something that is seasonal, part-time, afternoons and weekends, and disrupting cyclists and pedestrians. We're not really multimodal if we don't include them in our planning. I think it might work out all right, but I'd like to point out that it didn't start out that way. We were just going to put in a street. And when you do that, when you're retrofitting, and we need to think about this in terms of the complete streets policy too. When we're retrofitting, we really don't have anything that says how you're going to adapt to the land use that's already there. And when you put a street in, you do impact the land use, and the land use impacts the street. So I just wanted to point that out.
All right, is there any, Dave Cronin, city engineer, is there any other questions? We have like 5 minutes left, and I would say thanks, Commissioner Bryan in the chat shared the listing of all the capital improvement projects by score, so those are there.
Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair, I'd just like to kind of extend a thank you to staff for putting this thing together, because while the overall CIP plan broken down by projects and year and departments is really good to look at, it's even better for us at least to kind of drill down and see what these projects look like, what their overall projections are for cost and what their priority was. So I think it's really good that we've had a chance to look over these, and I hope that we get more chances in the future, maybe an annual thing to kind of see, a few months ahead of the new year, if we can figure out what is going on. What are the big things that not only we as MTC commissioners, but the public kind of needs to keep an eye on in terms of major transportation related projects. That being said, I do think there's a couple things now that I look at that link that I kind of would like to see on this list, even if they are unfunded, just to kind of see what didn't quite make the cut. So there's a couple of citizen input projects that were not funded for the next few years, it looks like, as well as the really big one, the transit, the transit hub. So it looks like that's going to be constructed this year, I believe, or at least the funds are for it this year. So I forget exactly what the breakdown is for that schedule, but that's a pretty big multimodal contribution there.
Dave Trent, City Engineer, is there any other questions on CIP? If not, we didn't have anything else to present, so we could adjourn until 6 p.m., maybe take a 5-minute break.
Yeah, shall we say 6:05? Just kind of round up.
That works for us.
Okay, sounds good. See you guys in a few minutes.
All right.
at 6:05, and most of us seem to be back.
Kurt, we good?
All right. Do you want to kick us off, Dave?
Yep, Dave Cronitz, the engineer. I'm going to turn it over to Allie to take roll for the regular meeting.
Allie Weems, MSO. When you hear your name, just say you're present. Catherine.
Present.
Lauren.
Present.
Thomas.
Present.
Charlie.
Present.
Donna.
Present.
Steve. Carol.
Present.
Nick.
Present.
And Aaron.
Present.
Okay.
All right, Dave Cronitz, the engineer. Commissioner Kuzmyak, I'll just turn the meeting over to you to start with the minutes.
Sounds good. All right, so welcome everybody to the regular agenda portion of our November 2nd meeting for the Multimodal Transportation Commission. We're going to start with approving the minutes. There's actually 2 sets of minutes to approve, so I'm just going to assume that this is going to require 2 separate votes. So let's go with the first one. So we need to approve the October 5th meeting minutes. So I'm hoping everybody has had a chance to at least review them. Any comments, questions? Doesn't look like it. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve. Aaron?
I'll move to approve October 5th, 20 minutes.
A second.
Okay. Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. We have a motion by Aaron and a second by Donna. Ali, can you please call roll for approval?
Yes. Allie Weems, MSO. Catherine.
Aye.
Lauren.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Charlie.
Aye.
Donna.
Aye.
Carol.
Aye.
Nick.
Aye.
And Aaron.
Aye.
Okay. Minutes are approved. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. The next set of minutes to approve are from our joint Multimodal Transportation Commission and Planning Commission meeting that was on September 21st. Does anybody have any questions or comments on those particular minutes? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I move to approve the September 25th or 21st, 2020 MMTC PC joint meeting minutes.
I second.
Ali, can you please call roll for votes?
Allie Weems, MSO. Catherine.
Aye.
Lauren.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Charlie.
Aye.
Donna.
Aye.
Carol.
Aye.
Nick.
Aye.
And Aaron.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Those minutes are approved as well. And I just noted that there's also a link for the land use and transportation relationship presentation on there as well. So that's kind of fun if you want to go look that up. Moving on to the next section, general public comment. Dave or Ali, do either of you have a thing that you need to read for this? Or do I read it? It's been a while since we've actually had somebody sign up for general public comment.
Yeah, there's a paragraph there. If you want to go over it, please do that. We have, I
Sounds
think,
good.
2 people signed up for public comment, so.
Okay, here we go. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues that are not scheduled on the regular agenda. Public comment will not be received for staff items, commission items, or calendar. Each person or organization will be limited to 3 minutes. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the commission make decision on items presented at this time. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone or unmute, state your name, sign in, and, state the name and address. Speakers should address all comments to the commission. Okay, who do we have first?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I believe Taylor Hall is signed up for general public comment. So Taylor, you're there. There we go.
Hello, commissioners. I'm Taylor Hall from 2100 Heatherwood, and I'm here on behalf of the Mutt Run Advocacy Group about the 27th Street extension. I just wanted to bring up some considerations and suggestions. Hope you can see this. As currently proposed, it goes on this north end of the Mutt Run, and it will effectively take away 60% of improved paths for low mobility users or limited mobility users. As well, it will affect, with increased traffic, affect users on the upper and lower dam road, the cars parked on the shoulder, bikes, people, kids, picnic gear, joggers, and cyclists use this road often throughout the whole year. And cyclists come in single and large groups. According to a KDOT study of the 27th and K10 intersection, this road won't really alleviate the safety concerns at this intersection. And probably there'll still be just as much traffic going back and forth. And so we urge that the steering committee increase its scope and to include alternates, not only to road direction, but alternates to a road. And we really want to solve these safety issues, and we don't want them to just shift to somewhere else in the park. This could include a park and ride from Sunflower Elementary. It's just a short drive to YSC. We could use this backside connection from the parks that the Parks and Rec already utilize, or we could utilize other fields in town like the Shank Recreational Sports Complex, which has ingresses and egresses already, and 8 fields, as well as public transportation access. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of other options that we should explore, and I hope that we can collaborate on this project, on this process. And I thank you, commissioners, for your time.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Thank you, Taylor. And I would encourage you to follow I believe they are public meetings with the steering committee. So if you're not already on that one, then it'll be good to get extra involvement. So thank you for your comments. Who is next on the agenda, or on the public comment agenda?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. Michael Allman also signed up to
speak under general public comment.
Okay, Michael, take it away.
Hi, good evening, Michael Allman. Speaking in this case with Brook Creek neighborhood. And I'd like to share my screen quickly here with that image. This is basically bragging rights, but also maybe FYI, just this may inform some of your future work. But last Friday, the project that we initiated 2 years ago through the Community Development Block Grant process, we got the 20-mile-an-hour pavement markings installed in the parts of our neighborhood that are 20 miles an hour. So we're just really tickled that this is happening, and we're going to see if it makes any difference with speeders. I want to close that, and basically I want to talk about speed humps. Seems like in the discussions in the last year or so since neighborhood traffic management program was initiated, that speed humps are getting a bad deal, taking a bum rap that I don't think is deserved. Now, I don't claim to be the only cause of that possible change of demeanor, but some years ago, I have criticized speed humps, but I never said that we should not do them. There's a lot of discussion in the 25-mile-an-hour ordinance that was brought up that many people said they want speed humps, that they work. But as far as my comments go, back in 2014, before neighborhood traffic management, the traffic calming projects included a project on 13th Street for $82,000 for basically 8 speed humps that was being called a bicycle boulevard. And I criticized that, saying, speed humps do not make a bicycle boulevard. It's a whole lot more. Then in 2016, that same 13th Street came to the City Commission, and I made similar comments there, basically saying, Lawrence has been using speed humps like a one-trick pony. That's all Lawrence can think of. I never want to imply that we shouldn't use them, but that I wanted the toolbox to be expanded. And then similarly, March of 2018, here at the Multimodal Transportation Commission, there were traffic calming projects, $100,000 for 13th Street again. And I made similar comments. I just wanted to be clear that as far as sustainability action and myself is concerned, we do like traffic humps. They're there 24/7 if they're put in appropriate locations. A speed cushion can be done that actually helps bicyclists because the bicyclists don't have to slow down. They can go right through the slot in the middle of it. So I just wanted to clarify that as far as I'm concerned in sustainability action. We'd like to see consideration of speed humps as part of the overall scope of any project, bicycle boulevards or slow streets, as I prefer calling them, along with chicanes and diagonal diverters and partial closures. Please include speed humps in your consideration. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Hey, fun fact, I don't know if you guys know this, but when you said that speed bumps are there 24/7, it reminded me, in England, apparently they're called sleeping policemen, which, yeah, even when a policeman is sleeping, they're still effective as traffic calming, so maybe they're onto something. Moving on to agenda items. All right, our first one is going to be to receive the update on the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program Public Outreach and Education Campaign. There's got to be a snappier, shorter
title for that, but with that, I'm going to turn it over to either Dave or Kathy. I don't know who's going to be presenting this one.
This is Dustin Smith with MSO.
I'll take it, and I'll take any suggestions anyone has to shorten the name of the campaign. So we've our consultant's been working on designing the public outreach and education campaign. We had our kickoff meeting in February, and then immediately thereafter started experiencing the impacts of COVID on the schedule and the type of outreach you can do when you're not having large public events. So we have Kathy from Alta Planning and Design with us tonight. She's going to give us a presentation that kind of gets us up to date on where we are and what we have left to do with designing the campaign and the implementation. And then also some background just on the efficacy of these kind of campaigns and her previous experience and successes that she's had. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Kathy Seabour, Alta Planning Design. Thanks, Dustin. Were you able to share the slides, or is that okay? Great.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Pulled up now. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. So as Dustin mentioned, and based on some requests that came from him, I will be talking a little bit about traffic safety campaign efficacy, a few examples of other campaigns we've done in other communities, give you a reminder of what we've accomplished so far on the Lawrence campaign, and then what's next, including our outreach and engagement approach, which has shifted due to COVID. So next slide. All right, great, thanks. So a couple of just things in case you all are interested to know this. There isn't a ton of research on traffic safety campaigns and their effectiveness, but of what is out there in terms of like peer-reviewed research, that research does indicate that, for starters, traffic safety media campaigns are effective in reducing crashes. There have been some meta-analyses done looking at reductions in crashes, and a couple of them saw reductions or somewhere around an average of 9%. And of course, that doesn't guarantee that any individual campaign will see that kind of reduction. And some of my other things that I'll share with you get into, that these types of campaigns do better when there are other things involved as well. So a couple of interesting research points also that get more specific into traffic safety campaign efficacy. So one is engaging with the target audience during the planning phase leads to a stronger and more targeted campaign. So that was really great that we reached out to the public and got their input on the messaging and the design. As far as types of campaigns, research shows that fear or shock-based campaigns can repel viewers, lead to weaker recall, or can lead viewers to reject them as implausible or not credible. So the campaign is taking more like a more positive approach. Delivery methods that are co-located with where road users are doing the behavior in question. So for example, speeding, reaching them while they're driving, can be more effective, are more effective because they serve as a prompt for that immediate behavior change. Ideally, campaigns are coordinated with other complementary efforts, such as enforcement, policy changes, and education. And also, your kind of traditional mass media campaign does a lot better when there's a community or personalized approach to the outreach channels, which is our approach in Lawrence. And finally, and kind of related to that, and something that we're exploring with the implementation is personalized messages. So if something is either delivered in person or coming from a peer, those types of messages have been significantly more effective than something that's just kind of coming, more broadly from without a particular messenger. So we're keeping all of those things in mind as we prepare this campaign for implementation, design it, and then plan our outreach approach. And I was planning to just go through my presentation and then open it up for questions. I'm assuming that's okay. Okay, so just a quick overview of some of Alta's campaign work in other communities. I was just going to share some highlights. In Eureka, California, which is a city of about 30,000, so significantly smaller than Lawrence. We did a campaign that focused really on clear, direct messaging. So these images here on your left, they're really bold, kind of reminiscent of traffic signals and signs. And went with like a very grassroots campaign. And in a community, in that particular community, we were able to be really like ubiquitous, where it was like through really low cost efforts. In that case, it was particularly like banners in the community rather than like your traditional media. The campaign really became like unavoidable. People saw it everywhere. One lesson learned from that one is, we didn't get a lot of response to our post survey. I don't anticipate that being an issue in Lawrence with how many people we had respond to our initial survey. But we'll be sure to plan for that. One interesting result from that one is 2/3 of the survey respondents in that post survey reported that they were more aware of pedestrians now when driving compared to before the campaign. Like their awareness increased. And then 2/3 also said that they thought other drivers were more aware. One other example, just for the sake of time, is Roanoke, Virginia, city of about 100,000. This was a focused crosswalk education campaign for pedestrians and drivers. And the main purpose was really to increase understanding and awareness of the crosswalk law there, that any corner is a crosswalk in their community. One result from that one is that the understanding of their crosswalk law increased from 55% to 77%. And this campaign was a combination of community media and paid media. And that the example is in the bottom center, the one that says every corner is a crosswalk. Okay, happy to talk more about those if anybody's curious, but I'll move us along to talk about the Lawrence campaign. So next slide. Just to let you know where we're at to date. Completed the marketing plan, which you all reviewed and commented on. Thank you so much for your contributions to that and helpful insights. We've taken those into account. The design or the look and feel process, we started with a visual preference questionnaire and survey for the city staff. We had the community input survey, and then the draft and final design concepts, which I know that the liaison from the MMTC took a look at those as well. And then next up is the campaign implementation plan. So what are we doing from here? We continue to ground the approach in community involved distribution. So that was the plan pre-COVID, and now it's still the plan, but even more so because we're not going to be able to rely as much on community events for getting the word out. But one of the approaches that we were already planning to do was this DIY kit model, where we would coordinate the printing and assembly of DIY kits for individuals, businesses, or community groups. So they would have physical materials in them, such as yard signs, posters, and stickers, as well as information about the campaign. And the plan is to work directly with community groups across the city, asking for their support in distributing these kits and their contents, through whatever their channels are. And we'll be working to with city staff and the PIO office to populate like a contact list, and definitely like welcome any suggestions there. But our goal will be to provide not just the materials, but also graphics, communications, talking points, also outreach best practices, and do follow up with those groups. So really like kind of take them along in the process. This would be neighborhood associations, schools, community groups, businesses, et cetera. So giving them bite-sized pieces of the campaign to make it really easy to pass that along to their constituents. Some other implementation efforts that are part of the whole strategy are digital advertising, some truck, some city vehicle like decals, social media, newsletter posts going out through city communication channels. And then we've also been talking about doing an educational flyer with PD, so that when they're giving out warnings, they can give out information about the campaign. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet, but I'm sure you all have been talking about, is the coordination with speed reduction across the city. So, we haven't written the content for that flyer, but if we're doing everything at the same time, there's a speed reduction during the campaign, then we'll be sure that all the communications, and particularly this educational flyer, include information about that. Okay, and then finally, next steps. This is going to be probably hard for all of you to see, but just so you know, we are working on the final graphic design, and the stakeholder group will be looking at that this week. From there, we'll be heading into the production of the actual materials. We'll be fleshing out the outreach and distribution strategy that I just talked about to really get into the specifics of it. Be developing all those communications and the volunteer outreach guidance. And then heading into, with the launch in February, engagement and coordination with community groups to get the word out. So that's all I've got for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Does anybody on the commission have any questions? Either Kathy or Dustin. You can just start speaking if you want. I don't think we have a ton of hands that I need to put in a queue or something. So.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I just wanted to say thanks for presenting the update tonight. I've been on that committee, I guess now for about 6 months or so, and it's nice to see the work coming along. I'm mostly interested in how the coordination with the speed reduction is going to be integrated into the marketing. So I don't know if you could just share more about that with the whole group, like timing wise, when would that be likely seen by this group?
This is Dustin Smith with MSO, and currently it looks like everything is lining up to be rolled out all together with we did get the ordinance passed to reduce the speed limit on residential streets to 25 miles per hour.
We currently have that installation of all those speed limit signs out for bid. Those bids will be open tomorrow. And so hopefully we can get the contractor going on that. And then we'll also be purchasing the data collection equipment to start doing our speed and volume data collection in concert with the rollout of the campaign and the speed limit change, so that we can then start, having that data to inform the targeted enforcement effort that we would start later in 2021.
This is Commissioner Bryan again. On the timeline that Kathy presented, it doesn't mention the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. I was specifically trying to figure out, how are these two projects integrated, and what's a calendar where we would expect to see the campaign materials for the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, so that the public would be educated about the change in the policy?
Dustin Smith with MSO. So we were kind of in a holding pattern, making sure that we got the ordinance through and actually got the speed limit changed before we fully incorporated that with the campaign. So now that we've got the ordinance, now we'll start kind of fleshing out what that looks like with the campaign. But that will be, rolled out all together. That message will be incorporated as well.
So Commissioner Bryan, so the campaign launch looks like it's scheduled for the end of January, according to the presentation we just received. Are we going to see something at the December meeting or January meeting to see the materials that'll be used to educate the public about the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit?
This is Dustin Smith with MSO. I may have to put Kathy on the spot and see if we were able to pull that in by the December meeting, or if we'll be able to see that or not.
Kathy Seabour, Alta Planning and Design. Yeah, the one thing I'll say is, right, so we were proceeding with the development of the campaign graphics, so the things that'll go on the, the signage and posters and things like that, prior to knowing about the speed reduction. And so our plan has been to incorporate messaging specific to the speed reduction, especially once we know for sure that those things are happening together at the same time, into the communications and into the educational flyer. I don't have an exact schedule for how those things are we develop a really detailed production schedule for each piece that we produce, and we haven't made that exact schedule yet. But those are the places where I think that the specifics about the speed reduction will be in the communications. So all of the things that aren't a printed material, right? But there's a press release, there's newsletter content, there's social media content, et cetera, and then the educational flyers. So once we have a schedule developed for those, and with each thing, we've been comparing it to your meeting schedule and trying to line it up as best we can, for sure. So we'll do our best to line that up, and if it doesn't line up with a meeting, then we'll be sure to bring that to you, Commissioner Bryan, and get your feedback then as our liaison. And then whatever we do have for those meetings, we can share.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I appreciate that. You know, our meeting tends to, our meeting calendar, we tend to cancel the January meeting. So I guess I'm looking at your proposed timeline, and I'm just struggling to see the kind of where this comes back to the full commission for their kind of review. I do appreciate that you're doing it tonight. But it does seem like there's going to be a point where this is going to be publicized and on its way before this group actually sees the final product. So that just concerns me. And I didn't know like the timing of the installation of the street signs, if that needs to be scheduled kind of to coincide with the campaign, or if the street signs go up first or they go up later. I was just curious what your opinion is on that.
This is Dustin Smith with MSO. It's generally looking like the street signs will be installed, you know, kind of starting around the first of the year and then finishing up in March. So there will be installation happening, not guaranteeing that every street will have their sign up in February when everything else rolls out, but there will be new signs, and all of the signs will be installed shortly after.
This is Commissioner Bryan. So is the idea that we'll start to install those signs before there's any public education about the change, or are we trying to do this simultaneous?
Dustin Smith with MSO. Yeah, I guess there's a possibility that some streets would have a new speed limit sign up before the campaign rolls out.
And Commissioner Bryan, so is that I guess I'm looking for some like expertise, like Kathy, is that a recommendation you guys are behind, that we move forward with changing the speed limit signs before we educate the public?
Right. Kathy Seaboard, Alta Planning Design. That's a really good observation. I think that my recommendation would be definitely to have some communication, even if the full campaign hasn't launched, that there's, you know, a press release or something that's letting people know about the speed reduction, because that I don't think you want to surprise people with that. I think it's okay if the messages for the, you know, the slow down messages for the campaign graphics go out a little bit later, but we're going to want something up front. So I think that's something that we can talk about, Dustin, with the timing.
Yeah, Dave.
City engineer, I would add that we've been trying to communicate that already. When we discussed the ordinance to reduce the speed limit, the city commission, you know, we've kind of emphasized that it's done in concert with the education campaign. So all the speed limit signs won't go up at the same time, but we will need to do some outreach to inform folks that even if we start installing some speed limit signs, it's part of the overall program that includes the education campaign, which will follow soon after. So we're also having some discussions on the enforcement plan going into next year, how we do that. And that will also be likely to be a phased approach where, as we're doing some enforcement for the first few weeks, it'll be, a lot of it will be more education based. If an officer pulls someone over, they'll give them, for instance, the pamphlet on the program before they issue a citation. And so there may be a phased approach to the enforcement as well. Yeah, we will certainly need to do some communication as the signs start getting installed. And we'll probably have a better idea on the timing of that after we get a contractor on board to do that. So,
Commissioner Bryan, well, I've had enough time, I think, on this. I'd like to hear others' thoughts. if anyone else has thoughts on this. And do we have any public comment on it?
We, Dave Cronin, city engineer, we had one person sign up for public comment, I believe, and that was Michael Allman. I guess, are you guys ready to receive public comment?
It kind of looks like there's not any other technical questions. Sorry, Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. It doesn't look like there's any other technical questions from the commission. So yeah, I think we can probably turn it over to public comment for now. So Michael, if you're still with us, take it away.
Yes, thank you. This is Michael Allman, and I'm speaking for myself on this topic. I'm wondering what that background conversation is that's kind of interrupting things. Can that be dealt with somehow?
Charlie's on mute now.
I want to reinforce Commissioner Bryan's statements there about the 25-mile-an-hour campaign. I find it very dismaying that there doesn't seem to be coordination between the education and the the installation of these 25-mile-an-hour signs, because as I recall, the whole point of the neighborhood traffic management program is that coordination between the various of the 5 E's, the enforcement, the education, and I don't, I'm concerned that this may not be happening here. And if it's not coordinated well, I would suggest delaying installing the signs until you have the education ready to roll out. That should probably roll out a week or two, maybe more, before the installation. Secondly, I'm not really happy with the underlying slogan, not of the 25-mile-an-hour campaign, but the general campaign, that of slow down, drive slowly, take it slow, slow down. We slow down for each other. That strikes me as a general principle. It's like an abstract concept, but it's not a goal. It's not something people can wrap their minds around and say 25 miles and associate that with the ordinance that reduces the speed limit. I think the campaign shouldn't say something about slow, but should say explicitly about driving 25 miles an hour. Keep kids alive, drive 25, something like that. There are other signs that are shown in the campaign about the crosswalks, disconnect from distraction. Those are good. But I really think we need to explicitly say, drive 25 and in various ways, any way we can, to make it clear what people, when they're on the street, are expected to do. Slowing down is just too open-ended. It's like slow down from 40 to 38, or how often, maybe when I'm driving on Sunday. So I think it needs to be much more explicit. So basically that's what I had to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Bringing it back up to the commission for any continued comments or questions.
I don't believe there's no official action. We're just receiving the update. So let's get any other input out there. Seeing or hearing none. Dustin or Kathy, any final thoughts?
Dustin Smith with MSO. I guess I would, everybody pointed out my error of omission there where I
forgot to mention that we would definitely do a press release before, just putting the signs out. So we would do that part of it, but the campaign part would still be in line for February with the rest of that material. But obviously we would have some sort of public notification before we just started changing speed limit signs. But thank you for reminding me.
Kathy Seabour with Alta Planning and Design. If I can just add to that we'll be reaching out to community groups before the launch to, get buy-in and start sharing, or I guess just getting, finding out who's going to be willing to share the materials for us once they're actually printed, and we'll have communications ready to go by then too. So, I think if anything, we're going to be talking to people about it prior to the actual media going up. So it sounds like timing wise, at a minimum, there's going to be that communication.
So this is Commissioner Bryan. I think what's concerning me is that there hasn't been any engagement or significant engagement with the neighborhoods right now. And I think they would be in favor of, all of this, but it just feels as if it's kind of all being done kind of without their input, and they're going to see these yard signs with the suggestion like, oh, just put these yard signs out. And I just imagine there will be a lot of questions and questions about the change in the speed limit, and just there hasn't been a whole lot of public discussion about it. So that's why I thought if we had it up tonight, maybe it would help with that. I think the timing is always kind of in everybody's mind a good question. Like, when will the enforcement will begin? When will the yard signs get put out? When will the regular 25-mile-an-hour speed limit signs get put out? So just at its very least, maybe it's just getting a clearer sense of the timeline of not just the yard signs, but also of the speed signs, of the enforcement, and whatever else is going to be put as part of the mix of this kind of multi-pronged effort.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Charlie, you bring up a good point. How could we get this out to the neighborhoods most easily? As someone who's a part of the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods, or LAN, which is basically a collection of all the active neighborhood associations in town, I always kind of default to that because though it may not be 100% effective in terms of actually reaching everybody on the ground, at least it's a good start to try to do a scattershot approach and talk to as many neighborhood representatives as possible. Now, Kathy, I don't know if your budget allows for that, but Dustin, it's possible that if you have time or availability, perhaps you could speak at the next LAN meeting to kind of update neighborhood leaders on what's going on. I don't know when the date of that is. I need to look it up, but.
Okay, this is Dustin Smith with MSO. I think that's a great idea to start reaching out sooner rather than later.
It's November 18th at 7 p.m. That's a Wednesday. So it's on Zoom, so it's easy enough to just kind of sign in from wherever. So let me know if you have any, questions about logistics there.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any other comments or questions? Okay, if not, let's move on to agenda item number 2. Thank you, Kathy, for your time. And we're going to move on to the action that we have, which is to consider appointing a replacement representative to the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program Public Outreach and Education Campaign Stakeholder Team. That was John Ziegelmeyer. He has resigned from the Multimodal Transportation Commission a few months ago, so we are looking for somebody to replace him. Charlie is our other representative, so this is kind of a team-based approach. It's not just one person's job here. I mean, currently it is, but it's going to be 2 people's job. So at this point, I guess it might be a good idea to get an idea of what the scope of these responsibilities would be. So I don't know who the best person is to ask, either Dustin or Charlie or whoever's been involved with this.
This is Dustin Smith with MSO. So we've the stakeholder team has been meeting roughly once a month to review material from Alta and give them feedback. And so actually we have a meeting scheduled for this Thursday afternoon, which we'll be looking at. They have a draft design for the other 2 messages of the campaign, the distracted driving and the yielding to pedestrians. And so we'll have a draft to look at and talk about this week. So we'd like to see if someone's available can step into that. And then after that, I would envision it's going to be monthly meetings roughly through, kind of the rollout in February, just to review any addition or the final design material and messages and possibly feedback on like our implementation strategy. So roughly one meeting a month would be the commitment.
And they're usually Thursday afternoons, or is that just?
Try to fit them into everybody's schedule. They're a little more flexible.
Okay. Thanks for that explanation. Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. At this point, I would take anybody who's interested in volunteering for being this representative. It would be good to get some extra eyes on this. And if not, I'm going to start nominating people. Lauren?
Yeah, I'd be willing to volunteer.
Okay, that would be great. If there's anybody else who's really itching to be on it, I guess we can have a face-off of some sort. But if not, I think we may have just decided that agenda item. So can we just do a vote by, do we have to do it with roll call or acclamation, or what do you think? Probably a real vote. So in that case, I motion that we appoint Lauren Freeman to be our replacement representative to the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program Public Outreach and Education Campaign Stakeholder Team to replace John Ziegelmeyer's seat. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. Ally, can you please call roll for votes?
Yes, Allie Weems, MSO. Catherine.
Aye.
Lauren.
Aye.
Thomas.
Aye.
Charlie.
Aye.
Donna.
Aye.
Carol.
Aye.
Nick.
I think I'm next, but I didn't hear anything.
Oh,
so
Nick, sorry.
aye. Sorry.
Aaron.
Aye.
All right.
Okay, it's approved. Lauren, thank you for volunteering, and I look forward to hearing back from you and Charlie after the next few meetings to kind of keep us apprised of the progress. That brings us to, well, it doesn't bring us to agenda item number 3. That one has been deferred. So we were going to consider approving the proposed data-driven process to identify sidewalk improvement routes for the annual Sidewalk Improvement Program. Dave, you can elaborate on this if you want, but as far as I understand, the data basically just isn't quite ready yet. There needs to be a couple more criteria included for the prioritization model. So,
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. That's correct. It's a very intensive computing process to create the model and all the different inputs. Taken longer than we thought, and given the we thought we could potentially have it ready today, but I don't think it's timing wise. I think it would be better to push it a month to give you and the public a little more opportunity to review that before we discuss it and seek approval of it. So we've deferred that until next month's meeting. So please look forward to that in December.
sounds good. Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. In that case, let's move on to agenda item number 4, which is to receive the presentation on the Lawrence Safe Routes to School plan. So whoever's in charge of that, please take it away. Ashley, I'm assuming that's you. Cool.
That is me. Can you hear me? Okay, great. My name is Ashley Myers. I'm a transportation planner with the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. And I'm here tonight with Jessica Mortinger, the transportation planning manager, to show you the draft Safe Routes to School plan, which I forgot to share. Just realized that. So excited to get started. Forgot to share my screen. Okay, here we go. All right, so you should be able to see it now. Okay. The Safe Routes to School plan has come before you all a couple of times over the last 2 years. The most recent one was in February of 2020. Jessica discussed when we were forming the plan. We intended to bring it to you in about April or May of 2020, and then COVID happened. And so we kind of paused and regrouped, and there's a slide in the coming slides about the timeline, and now we're back in order to share the draft plan. This plan is developed for a couple of reasons. One, the original Safe Routes to School planning process started in 2014, and this is kind of an outgrowth of that to actually develop an implementation plan. We needed, or the city needed to develop a formal citywide plan that had a process to develop the routes and to revise the routes and create outcomes and a working group in order to make progress on all of this. The groups that worked on developing this plan was the MPO, the City of Lawrence, the Public Health, the Sustainability Department of the city and the county, and then the school. And so all of those organizations together worked on a staff team or a working group in order to develop this plan. And so I'll refer to the staff team throughout this process, but that's who worked on developing this. The staff team also needed to develop this in order to have a plan for applying for funding for transportation alternatives funding through KDOT. The City of Lawrence has received funding in the past, even though the city did not have a plan, but by having this plan, it'll give the City of Lawrence's applications even more weight as they submit them. This is the timeline showing how the plan was developed. There was a lot of public input throughout the process, and this was a 15-month planning process with public input as part of very specific elements. So in the spring and summer of 2019, we had data gathering and a parent survey, and then we had in November, wintertime, input on very specific things, as well as the public comment period for this plan. The staff team recognizes that there may be delays in implementation due to the fact that students are not in school, back in school full-time in person, but the plan needed to be adopted in order to not lose progress on everything that's occurred throughout the planning process, and also so implementation processes are not delayed completely. Recognizing that some of the school implementation things will probably be delayed because of the fact of not having in-person class, but some of the other ones can continue to move on. The Safe Routes to School framework is comprised of the E's of bicycle and pedestrian planning, and these are the typical E's. However, part of the national conversation in the spring regarding systemic racism prompted the National Safe Routes to School Partnership to remove enforcement from the E list and instead include engagement. However, enforcement may still be needed. It's just not a critical component or one that must be there anymore. So in this plan, we've added that context into the plan and regarding engagement and having the community say that enforcement is important. And that was repeatedly told to us throughout the different engagement opportunities. And so concerns about how kids walk and bike to school and the safety. And so enforcement is still a component, it's just not a primary element anymore. Data gathering was a component of the plan, and student travel tallies have occurred every semester since the fall of 2014, except for the spring of 2020 and the fall of 2020 because of COVID. And you can see there that the average percentage is about 18%. The nationwide percentage is about 13%. So the City of Lawrence public elementary and middle schools are doing well, but the staff team feels that the city could be doing even better if there were more Safe Routes to School programs and elements. The parent survey was conducted for the first time since 2015, and it asked all K through 8 students how they travel to school. And this was a lesson learned for us because the received 216 responses, which seems okay, but compared to the responses received in 2015, it was a lot lower. And that had to do with, in 2015, paper surveys were passed out, where this time it was just done online, and people didn't respond the same way as. Also, the staff team did crossing guard counts, and so staff and volunteers evaluated crossing guard locations in existing places and then potential places by counting the number of students and gaps and vehicles depending on the different crossing location in the morning 3 times and in the evening 3 times, and then evaluated them based on the warrants that the city has, which is the threshold in order to have crossing guards. And there are some locations that currently have crossing guards that actually do not meet the threshold to have crossing guards. And there are some new places, potential locations that do meet the warrants for crossing guards. So the city commission will need to have a conversation about this due to the budget impacts, and that is mentioned in the plan. A existing conditions memo was also written as part of the planning process because when Safe Routes to School started in 2014, no written plan was ever developed. The Safe Routes to School routes were identified and they were incorporated into the regional pedestrian plan, but no plan was actually written. And so we didn't have a record of everything that had occurred from 2014 until now. So we wrote this existing condition memo and talked about the annual bike and walk in school days and the bicycle training, and then also documented the miles of sidewalk gap and crossing improvements. And those are approximate because staff ended up looking at the aerials in order to tell where sidewalk had been improved. This graphic is from the parent survey, and how you read it is, I'm going to talk about barriers first, but the barriers are the gray bars. And so the longest bars are the highest number, receive the highest number of survey responses. So the top 4 barriers in order to allowing kids to walk or bike to school was the speed of traffic along routes, the amount of traffic along routes, weather, and then the safety of intersection and crossing. Well, we can't do anything about weather, but speed of traffic and amount of traffic and then comfortable crossings are things that the city of Lawrence is working on and something that the plan proposes solutions to address. The motivating factors are the blue bars. And so the top 3 motivating ones are presence of sidewalk, distance, and quality of sidewalks or pathways. As part of the planning process, the staff team evaluated routes from the prior routes. And in the graphic here on the right in the heat map, the yellow lines were the existing routes and the blue are the proposed new routes. And the school provided anonymized student data that was then mapped, and these heat maps were created. And then when the staff team looked at the heat maps, we looked at the pockets of density. And so on the Billy Mills map there, down on Iowa, there's a pocket of red and yellow, a heat map of where there are a bunch of students living. And so we proposed connecting that to the route with the blue line there. We recognize that this data is just point in time data and also could change, but also it does reflect the housing patterns of the neighborhoods. And then on the other map is just showing walk sheds that were developed using the street networks and sidewalks in order to show half-mile, mile, and mile-and-a-half distance buffers from the schools, because sometimes it was kind of like, well, how far is that? And so it was good to know. And we did that for each school as well. Then we had this public input on very specific elements. The staff team hosted a meeting open house in November of 2019. However, there was low attendance at that meeting. And so staff talked to the schools, all of the middle and elementary schools, about who would be the best person or group for staff to visit with to get this input about. And then staff visited either the site council, parent teacher association, or parent teacher organization at each of the schools, except for 2 of them, because one was a snow day and one, the school, we were just not scheduled or invited to attend. One of the questions that we spoke or included in the feedback packet and received a bunch of information on was about including sidewalk on one or both sides of the street. The prior goal of the Safe Routes to School plan was to have sidewalk on both sides of the street no matter what. But by looking at this information, you can see that for major streets, which are arterials, on Safe Routes to School or not Safe Routes to School routes, it's a very high percentage of saying yes, there should be sidewalks on both sides of the street. Collector streets are also fairly high for a route, and not as high for not a route. But when you look at the difference between collector and local streets, there was about a 30% drop off of people who did not say, or people who said that there must be sidewalk on both sides of the street. So while the margin between one side and two side for local streets is not all that different, when you're looking at the difference between collector and major, it is a fairly large drop. So recognizing the issue of sidewalk gaps in Lawrence and the financial need and conversations had during the planning process, the goal that's included in the plan is to have sidewalk on both sides of the street for arterials and collectors, and only one side of the street for local streets. Now, it's a possibility that there could need to be gap fill at some point on local streets in order to have connectivity. This is an example of a route alternative that was asked at 7 different schools. The staff, when looking at the different routes, realized that there were really 2 good options, but just needed to ask what the preferences were of the people actually using those routes. So we asked these kinds of questions in 7 locations. Then also this question was included in the feedback packet, and it's just interesting, and it kind of tells you what you would expect, that older students can walk farther and are more likely to be able to cross a major crossing. But it was still good to get that information from people. And now I will turn it over to Jessica to talk about the rest of the PowerPoint.
So Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. So there's a variety of recommendations in the plan, and they're kind of categorized under these categories, some of which we've discussed in February, you might recall, and others you might not or might have evolved since. But we're going to go through kind of each of the categories, and on each page, as we flip through those, you'll see in each recommendation page, the first of which is traffic control, we've included comments in blue that were direct things that we heard from the public. I think one of the things we've heard from MMTC before is, and we really wanted to be able to present to you, is to engage how we show you how we use the engagement and the comments that are brought to our attention as part of the planning process as a way to construct the plan around the community identified issues and needs. So these things may or may not look kind of familiar, but one of the biggest things that we heard from parents about walking and biking is about safety and comfort. And a lot of that comes with comments about enforcement related to parent or other driver behavior. And so recognizing that, you can see the implementation of neighborhood traffic management is going to be really important to neighborhood schools. We also realized we need to approve and adopt the school area traffic control policy that had been updated since that 2014 process started, but never adopted. We made some edits to that and sent that back to legal to begin that process. So hoping that will be a phase of implementation that comes out of this plan. We also realized it was really inconsistent between schools what information was given about existing conditions related to traffic circulation for school sites. And so we envisioned, as part of this, we've talked about it before, really a series of 3 maps, the one of which would be documenting existing traffic circulation patterns for each school. And so we envision a process of implementation look like establishing those maps to document what the schools are sometimes given in hand-drawn maps, sometimes is information found in monthly newsletters or flyers that go home one time a year, as opposed to having a series of documented maps for all the schools showing traffic circulation. Next, we talked a lot about comfortable crossings. Again, that school area traffic control policy establishes some framework for that. But we also envisioned is the integrating safe routes crossings into non-motorized prioritization process. But we really had hoped to develop a pedestrian crossing evaluation as part of this plan. However, we weren't able to because it's really reliant on having data collectors. And so we believe a lot of the information and data around speed and volume that we hope to collect for neighborhood traffic management is going to be really important to building a model that will help us evaluate crossings to be able to really compare and evaluate some of the other crossing consideration that you hopefully will have in coming months. Conversations can be important to implementing safe routes. Next is crossing guards. Ashley mentioned kind of briefly, and we won't get into too much detail, but we really believe there needs to be a rotating and scheduled evaluation of crossing guard locations, particularly considering there are ones that currently don't meet warrants and other potential ones that likely do or don't meet warrants that need to be more regularly evaluated. We recommend crossing guards should be placed along the designated routes, and that process and timeline needs to be cognizant of budget process. And so obviously COVID threw us off for this year. I think otherwise it probably would have been part of that budget process. I think there's going to need to be city conversation about priorities, whether that happens with the school area traffic control policy and or with a future budget conversation. We would envision this plan laying out a starting framework for some of those conversations. We talked a little bit about constructing and maintaining routes, and so this prioritizes sidewalk gaps on both sides of arterial and collector and one side of local streets. We've also identified as part of this some bikeway projects that fall along, that were places where the bikeway plan had consistencies along safe routes and opportunities to improve bike level of comfort. And then we talk about considering and prioritizing maintenance and code compliance of infrastructure in operating budgets. Obviously, condition and quality are a large part of people's comfort on facilities. We recognize working together is going to be really important. There's not a formal agreement to do this work. We did it really just with a stakeholder committee that was formed by MPO staff as we began this project. That was kind of an informal, need to say working group, but we really believe there needs to be an MOU. There had been one drafted previously and it's never been approved. We have updated that based on the conversation and the planning work that we've done as part of this plan. And I believe that in line with the school area traffic control policy is going to need to be something to be evaluated as we move forward to establish a more formal relationship to implement safe routes and do the ongoing work that needs to be done to make this program planning work successful. Of course, biking and walking culture is a lot more than just building infrastructure, although comfortable infrastructure is a large part of that, and that's what we hear most from the public. We know from our bike lessons and safety training that that's been a valuable resource to 4th and 5th grade students across the school district. Bike and walk to school days have happened over time at different levels of intensity for different schools. That's something we call to continue. We talk about a lot of other encouragement events around incentivizing biking and walking. We are also working in coordination with public health and the school district currently to develop some pedestrian safety education to pursue some more interdisciplinary curriculum related to pedestrian use, like safe use, but also evaluating pedestrian infrastructure and those sorts of things in terms of route and photo ID and other opportunities. So I'm looking forward to see what comes of that as part of implementation, and that work has begun. If we continue to think about that, we think about website. We've had conversations, and one of the things we envision happening is thinking about bike-friendly driver training. offered by the League of American Bicyclists into young driver education. One of the second other maps that existed from part of the first process or was used that way is some simple encouragement maps, and we're in process to work on developing those, although in-person classes are really going to depend on how relevant those are right now, but we definitely know they need to be updated based on existing conditions that have been or changed or improved since the last time maps were produced. We also envisioned we had a public comment that we thought was very insightful to the idea of walking school buses, and that was a parent who told us in relation to Broken Arrow School that a crossing guard was needed at every crossing along 27th Street. And in cases like that, I think some of the things we think about in terms of creative ideas is thinking about how we can promote and encourage school champions and parents around developing walking school buses. And so that's really where the team felt comfortable in terms of liabilities at this point. And so we are going to work on a guide to kind of help lay that foundation to provide some support to anybody who may want to do that in terms of some simple tips and tricks around establishing walking school buses or bike trains. Writing this plan really gave us the opportunity to incorporate it into the 5-year cycle of rotation of MPO plans. So we envision really conducting that parent survey every 5 years. We've, as Lashley noted, we've learned some lessons that must be in paper in the future. And we have to just invest and budget the time to document and input all of that. We continue to want to inventory as part of all of our bicycle and pedestrian planning, the sidewalk and bikeway networks, and then continue to conduct travel tallies when schools are in person. We know that there has been progress made. We document some of that in the plan since the last process, and we know that Safe Routes to School is an ongoing process that needs constant attention and work to continue to make progress on many of these initiatives. Our plan also has some other best practices that didn't fit in other categories, but we really identified an idea and a need to look for and find school champions that can be recognized for each school to communicate with. We found that we can communicate with individual schools. That was the most effective way for us to communicate rather than through the district because they're pretty autonomous. But we believe that having a school champion, there's a lot of interest and hopefully some on-site organization of some of these cultural elements that are beyond the role of city and haven't really been taken on by administration at the school district. But we really did envision that we have also built in some other timeline requirements for when we would envision routes to be reevaluated that could be outside of that 5-year cycle if there's new boundaries cited, for example, or large land use changes. The plan really has 2 outcome goals that we're looking at in terms of thinking about time-bound, really coordinated goals. The first of which is looking at a 20% walking and biking rate for students by 2023. That goal is in line with the community health improvement plan, and we felt like it was both reasonable and, depending on what happens with in-person education and how much time we have to work on that, we felt like it's a good goal to continue to notch and move that needle forward, considering the amount of students who live kind of within each walking radius of school. It's not realistic ever to get probably to 100% because some of our boundaries are quite large in terms of expecting elementary school age children to walk or bike. We also looked at completing sidewalk networks along elementary and middle school routes and set some goals there. You can see kind of what those percentages are compared to where we're at. We felt like that was appropriate considering the effort and investment we've made and our commitments that we've gotten in terms of transportation alternative grants to continue to make that progress before our next planning process. Overall, here is all of the routes, and they're not identified by school. Of course, in the plan, there is a series of maps for every school that has that routes, but this gives you an idea throughout our community, because we have neighborhood schools, that many of these routes are in neighborhoods or through neighborhoods, and that these are the routes that we have proposed. Out of that, based on the goals for either sidewalk on both sides for arterial or collector, or single side for local street, these are the gap projects for sidewalks that we identify in the plan. And then on the next slide is our proposed projects that are bicycle projects that have been identified in the plan. And those are listed by school with additional information in the plan. This is just really a high level system, kind of wide map. We talked about amending the plan, kind of warranted by boundary changes or every 5 years, and we envision incorporating this into the MPO cycle that the MPO has kind of taken for bike and ped plans to continue to ensure that this plan and the process, the large scale engagement that goes around it, kind of would be done at least every 5 years. That allows us to do them all before we do a long range transportation plan update, which means that they've all gotten a little attention, because when we do that system wide stuff, we don't have the time to do this level of detail of work. We talked about the public comment that was used to during the development of the plan, and showed you some of those comments. The MPO typically does a public comment period, either 15 or 30 days at the end of every plan development when we post a final draft plan, to allow anyone the opportunity to comment on and allow us to respond to. And we do that. We respond to every comment we get during this comment phase. Sometimes it's a comment received, sometimes it's changes we make to the plan, sometimes it's explaining why something is the way it is, or the discretion the staff team has had. And so you can find all of those comments and our responses. They were posted on the agenda. Overall, you can see general out of the 32 comments, which isn't an extraordinary amount. But this is an online notice and engagement at this point when students aren't in session. And so we did realize that we probably didn't, we were going to be limited in some of that. And there are comments like, kids aren't even in school. How is this relevant? So I think those are the types of things we just have to be cognizant of the reality of. We also put this picture of Appendix A. It's not super fancy, but what it does have in it, and I want to point out, is every comment we received during the process, whether that was from an original parent survey that was distributed to each school, or whether that was from our other online survey with the packets where we visited all the site councils and input all that data. All of that can be found in Appendix A, documented if it's not specifically also called out in the plan. And that is there for you as a resource as we continue to work through implementation of this plan. It's something that we try to do with every planning process that we do, to provide that to you as documentation in support of the work that we've done. In next steps, Multimodal Transportation Commission is the first committee to provide that final comment and hopefully recommendations to adopt the plan to the City Commission. This is our timeline for us to take this plan also through to the MPO's Technical Advisory Committee and Policy Board, and City Commission and School Board. That's kind of our draft timeline so far. I'd be willing to entertain any questions or comments you might have about the planning process as part of your discussion.
Hey, Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Thank you, Jessica and Ashley, for that excellent overview of the plan. Does anybody in the commission have any comments to start us off? Carol, I thought I saw your hand raised early on, but you are muted.
Okay. Oops.
Nope. You got to go back on to unmute.
How about
there you
that? Go. Commissioner Bowen. Jessica, my first question is on, you had criteria for collector and arterial streets, and not all collectors are as big an issue. And I wondered if, well, those are technical words, if maybe there are some other words that might work better, like speed and volume or visibility or something. I didn't want to make it more detailed, but I'm not sure the classification would be the right way to go there.
I can, Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager, I can appreciate the context that you're trying to get out there. However, the only legal framework we have in adopted plans and regulation is the major thoroughfares map, which establishes that street classification and dictates how we divide streets. I would note that we don't have speed and volume data, like actual speed information, not just posted speed information for the streets across our city consistently. We have KDOT traffic counts from every 3 years, and we have traffic counts that have been taken for different projects, whether that would have been traffic control or construction projects before and after. But much of the speed and volume data that we've done has been proxies based on our travel demand model. So until we build that out further and or have conversations about how we want to amend that a major thoroughfares map, then I think it's our best available way to dictate that framework.
Okay, my next comment is on the group. What did you call that group that was supposed to integrate the different like schools and city and health department? What do you call that group?
Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. So for the purpose of this plan, we called it a working group because it didn't have a formal structure. We invited all the parties that we perceived to be organizational stakeholders in the process to participate, but without the formal agreement, it's not a formal committee or work, it was just a working group of stakeholders.
Okay, Commissioner Bowen again. Where do I want to go with that? So we really don't have an identity for safe routes to school, not a single identity. So if a parent wanted to say, well, we need something you didn't notice, and where would they take it?
So Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager, that's our recommendation about establishing the formal work group and establishing an MOU between the school district and the city of Lawrence, is because we feel that there needs to be a single entity where those issues could be arisen and evaluated and responded to. I think that's what parents recognized in the process, is that they directly told us they felt that schools basically said it's the city's issue, and then sometimes the city said it's the school's issue, and it was, whether it was consistent or not, probably was dependent on who they ended up talking to in terms of getting issues evaluated or responded to. And so I think that's part of what we evaluated in the process is, one, we need to adopt that school area traffic control policy with some changes based on planning work that we did and what we heard. And then the second part is we need a formal working group that is a formal recognized body of both the city commission and the school board to do that body's work.
Commissioner Bowen again. How are we relating to the city at large? Not everyone has a student. And so they have no input, no output. They have no idea what's going on. How are we going to handle that?
So Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager, all of the public opportunities that we had for commenting with parents, particularly because the surveys were online, had an option for members of the community at large to take them. In fact, the school-specific surveys asked people, do you have a student or not? And the press release was sent out to the general public and said, it provided an opportunity for neighbors to also take the engagement. So I would say while we targeted engagement with spending additional staff hours attending sites to get parent-specific input, actually we had more people show up that were just concerned community members than actual parents to our open house. And so I think there were opportunities for the public to weigh in. And I think, as you find in our recommendations, some of these things are not new. I mean, there are neighborhood traffic management policy. There are other policies that the implementation of them has had other public process opportunities, like through Multimodal Transportation Commission or the City Commission. And so I'd say there should be things that shouldn't necessarily be surprising to the public at large if they're paying attention to transportation related issues.
Commissioner Bowen, So do we have it integrated into our overall sidewalk plan?
So in terms of the routes, the safe routes. Okay. So Jessica Morton, Transportation Planning Manager. How this gets integrated in is the routes identified in this plan after it gets adopted get integrated into the non-motorized prioritization policy. So the gaps that we show as projects will be scored and rated projects in that policy. That also means segments that might have been identified as gaps that were on the second side of local streets and or were on streets that are no longer routes would be removed from that list. And I think that's the integration. The other part of that, and we'll talk about it next month with sidewalk improvement, is I think part of the modeling work we're doing on routes for sidewalk improvement hopes to prioritize as one component routes that are more heavily used, in which case routes are evaluated for all of the schools. And so I'd say for built environment components, those are the ways that currently projects are incorporated into the larger bike and ped planning.
And Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Any other comments or questions from the Commission? Donna?
You mentioned the MOU that was attempted prior and that it just never got approved. What would be the way forward for that, or how did it, was there a stopper that it didn't get approved?
I think we're going to have some conversation with legal. I think it really, without getting into specifics, because I wasn't involved in that process and can't really speak on behalf of the people that were, it's my understanding there's a lot of concern about liability. And so I think we're going to have to break that agreement down into the parts that are who's responsible for which things, and whether or not that means the school approves the school area traffic control policy, which was part of the previous MOU, or whether or not they just have an agreement about the framework of how we're going to work together. And we go from there. So I think there's going to have to be conversations. We have a draft with legal, and I think it's going to just take some due diligence of following up. Also recognizing that COVID has put a lot of additional stress and pressure on the school district and administration to respond to many of those other needs where they're trying to figure out how to educate students. So we recognize, of course, it would have been nice if we could bring that with everything else, but I just don't think it's appropriate. We didn't want to wait until we had that to adopt the plan and move forward, because there's other implementation things we believe we can continue to make progress on. But I think it's going to be a challenge, and we're going to have to get some attorneys together to have those conversations about where everybody, what's the minimum bottom line people can kind of feel comfortable with to get to a common ground about working together.
Right. And Donna Hulting, Commissioner, I just, as I was going through the draft on page 7, there's a map and it shows where each of the schools are. And I think Broken Arrow is in the wrong place.
No, well.
I mean, just, you can look at it later, but
okay.
Thanks.
I laugh a little bit because that's like a GIS data set. So if it's in the wrong place, like it's a labeling error probably in the map, but.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you for reading our plan.
Are you done, Donna? All right, this is Commissioner Bryan. First off, I just want to say I continue to be impressed by the amount of work you guys do as an MPO with the staff of there's only 2 of you. They have interns, but this is amazing. And having watched it over the years and participated in it, I'm just really impressed. So that said, I was curious. There are so many comments from the parent survey that essentially ask for bus service. And in the plan, there is a little discussion about encouragement strategies, including on the encouragement map, including information about the student bus pass program, and then putting the nearest bus stops on the middle school maps. And I think there was another section under education around trying to integrate bicycling, walking, public transit education and all subject areas for the recognition of walking and biking culture. So it seems to me like there's a pretty big public input around the need to think differently about school buses. And I don't know that space for it, but it feels noteworthy. And I'm left wondering, what are we to do about this desire that the public has that kids have better access to school busing or maybe just public busing. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that. And if it's not the place to put it in the safe routes work, is there some other place where that type of community sentiment can better be expressed, or is there a way to direct that in a way that'd be productive? Because it feels as if those comments are kind of they're not really handled. They're kind of acknowledged, but then it goes nowhere. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that as an MPO.
Yeah. So Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager, and this is a little bit where when we ask about busing, we get the legal framework. So the USD response has typically been that students who live outside of that 2.5 mile radius get provided state reimbursed busing. And so with previous budget considerations that happened after the previous recession, the school district stopped busing students who weren't eligible for that reimbursement outside of the 2.5 miles. We know through conversations that some of the school boundaries based on identifying low income areas are drawn to put students outside of the 2.5 mile buffer to be able to provide them busing. So I think some of those decisions are being made, at least that's what we have been told. I, again, haven't been privy to those conversations. We recognized that and we struggled with it a lot. But we also felt like, and through some correspondence, Charlie, you specifically had from the school district, and some work that we've done, which is also that it's unpublished, but other parents who request transportation out inside the 2.5 mile radius, if there's capacity on the buses, this district attempts to accommodate them. It's not promised. It's just if they have capacity because they're already running a vehicle, and a lot of that decision kind of gets made on a case by case basis. But they only and they do deny some requests. They admitted, they deny a couple of requests a year of people that they can't accommodate because they don't have that capacity. I'm not sure what the answer is there. That is solely a program and project run entirely by the school district. And we have, I think it's fair to say, while we've had engagement and representation from the school district administration, because so many schools are also autonomous, we had to do a lot of due diligence to go out and engage kind of with each school specifically, as we talked about some school and site specific things. And we're getting ready to do some of that again around traffic circulation plans. And I'm not sure there's a good answer. I think as far as the community busing goes, I think there's going to be opportunities in the route redesign work that happens around the transit hub to hopefully address some of those in the community engagement and survey stuff as that happens. Yeah, I would welcome any thoughts you might have about that. I'm kind of left. It was something the work group really did. I mean, they read the comments and they really just kind of didn't touch it, because I think the school district's stance was, this is the law, this is where we get reimbursed, this is our program.
I don't have any answers. I was just interested in your opinion on it. It feels like this is one of those spaces where the public takes advantage of an opportunity to give that input, and then it just gets kind of cataloged. And I was just scanned and I pasted in a whole bunch of the comments that there's so many that are related to busing, and it feels like parents really want to see their kids take school buses. And then if we try to grow a culture where people think about the bus first, the natural place to start is with school busing. And then, the next step is to introduce them to public busing. And they start to see like taking a bus is a good way to get to school. It's a good way to get to downtown. It's a good way to get to, wherever. So there feels like there's an opportunity here with the amount of parent interest in school busing, but then the way we solve it doesn't feel like it's available to us. And, some of the suggestions in here deal with, basically allowing for some paid option. What you were discussing is I sent an email kind of because the school district sent out a message about school busing. And I noticed that there are bus stops right in my neighborhood, but I'm not outside of the 2.5 miles. But I recognize like I could easily walk my child to, 4 blocks away to get on the school bus. And that increases her physical activity, gives her a chance to take a safe transportation option to get to school, and gets her used to using a bus. Unfortunately, the way the policy is set up, that bus that's right near my home is not really available to her. And that just seems like someone needs to tackle that problem. And I don't know if it's a matter of just a more efficient way to distribute busing in a community so that more kids have access to it, that it's not based on 2.5 miles. But if the payment for the bus system is number of kids riding it, then that might be a disincentive to increasing access. And that's maybe a fundamental question is how is the bus system paid for?
So
who's paying
Jessica
for it?
Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. I think that's the 2.5 miles is state law, and the state reimburses the district for busing students outside of 2.5 miles. And so because of that reimbursement, that's the large portion, if not all, I don't know that answer, of the expense of busing, that they cut all of their local responsibility in terms of cost of busing as part of previous budget conversations.
Well, I wish Ron was still on our commission. These are questions that usually would go to Ron May.
Carol Bowen, Commissioner. Are there any efforts to place city bus stops near middle school and high school?
Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager. I think that those are going to be opportunities to look at next year as the Lawrence Transit embarks on their phase 2 of their route redesign work. Phase 1 is being done this fall and winter by KU students, and phase 2 will be the national-led consultant project. And I think those types of opportunities hopefully can be, there'll be opportunities to identify some of those needs in terms of origins and destinations for that trip making. So kind of it's a process outside of Safe Routes to School process.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. Any other comments or questions?
Erin Payton, Commissioner. I mean, a couple of things I thought were interesting about this. I mean, I read pretty much all the comments, and it was interesting just to see, I mean, everything that I feel like we've talked about for years or thought about for years, and it's all on there. And looking at, I think somewhere in there, it asked people to identify where they saw as the biggest intersection concern. And it basically seemed to depend on where people lived. So I noticed that New York, I think it was New York School, or maybe it was Liberty Memorial, but it was all over the map. I think just because it's a grid, but it kind of gave me a sense of how strongly parents feel like those intersections and traffic are a concern. But what was really interesting to me was seeing that 67% of kids had asked to bike or walk in Lawrence this year, which is interesting and kind of, I guess, hopeful. But yeah, the other thing I had noticed that I've thought about before, but not a whole lot, was busing. And I've heard people say, and I think I saw in some of the comments that issue of, you don't have a safe route, but if you live like for instance, where I live at 23rd and Clinton Parkway, you have to cross Iowa. If you're first grader, you have to cross Iowa if you want to walk to Schwegler, despite that it's close. And I think I saw someone, a Schwegler, perhaps parent, I can't remember, that said something like, no one's going to let their kid cross there. I have seen some parents let their kids cross there. So I just thought a lot of that data was really interesting, and was kind of excited to see some of the so much interest in being able to bike and walk to school, even though people feel like they can't. So.
Anything else? Okay, well, the Kuzmyak MMTC chair. In that case, thank you everybody for the lively discussion, and to Jessica and Ashley for presenting the plan. At this point, our action is actually to recommend the approval of the Safe Routes to School plan. Oh, Carol, saw a hand.
Didn't we have some people that wanted to speak to it?
Good question. Dave, is there anybody in the room or online who is registered for this particular agenda item?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. There might be, I know there's some folks that are interested in speaking to item number 5 regarding the project plans. So if there's anyone online that would like to speak to this item, I would just open it up.
So it looks like Michael C. is not able to speak, but did provide the letter. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to read the, there is at least 2 letters that are attached to the agenda. I'm trying to think if there's any more.
Dave Cronin, city engineer. And I think Hans, Peter, Gloria, Horatia, Schulze, they were on earlier, but I don't see them online anymore.
Yeah, they seem to have left.
But we did attach their correspondence to the agenda item. So.
And just to make sure, I think I'd seen communication earlier that the concerns may have been addressed already. Is that correct, Dave or Jessica? Do you want to go into more detail of that?
Dave, can you?
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. We'll discuss those with agenda item 5. It's more in relation to that specific project in those locations. Some locations have changed from our previous routes to the routes in the new plan. So we have we'll address those with that agenda item.
Okay, sounds good. In that case, I guess we can probably move forward with approving the Safe Routes to School plan. So I would entertain a motion for that.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I move we approve the Safe Routes to School plan.
Commissioner Hulteen, I second.
Okay. Allie, will you, sorry, before we go, any further discussion on this? No? Okay. In that case, Allie, will you please call names for, call roll for the votes?
Allie Weems, MSO. Catherine?
Aye.
Lauren?
Aye.
Thomas?
Aye.
Charlie?
Aye.
Donna?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And Aaron?
Aye.
Okay, well, in that case, it passes and the Safe Routes to School plan is approved. So thank you, Jessica and Ashley, for that, for leading us through that. And with that, we are technically set for our next agenda item, which is agenda 5. It's been about 2 hours. Is anybody interested in taking a quick 5-minute break and coming back to this? I'm okay with pushing through. I can kind of go either way. So quick show of hands, who would like to take a 5-minute break? All right, that's probably good enough. 7:55 then, shall we say? And I will see you all back here soon. All right, it's 7:55. This is Kuzmyak, MMTC chair, getting us back in gear for our final regular item on the agenda. I think we have about a quorum, so I guess let's jump right into it. This is agenda item number 5. Recommend receiving the 2021 Safe Routes to School field check plans and provide feedback. Jake, are you good to go?
Yes, good evening, everybody. This is Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer for Municipal Services and Operations. Our consultants, SBB Engineering, recently completed field check plans for this Transportation Alternatives Grant project. These plans have been posted on a project website for review by the public. Staff contact information is on there as well. So if public has questions regarding the plans, they've got a place to reach out and get those questions answered. In addition, we've also sent letters to all the affected property owners, again, kind of spelling out the project, what the impacts are, and who to go to if they have questions. Before we get into any of those plan-specific questions, however, I wanted to discuss the memo that was attached to this agenda item. And in short, this Dave kind of alluded to it briefly with that last item, but this memo just says that the plans were developed off the existing Safe Routes to School plan. The staff has recognized that the plan is in the process of changing, and it's probably appropriate to modify this project to align with what those changes are going to end up being. And because these changes modify the plan significantly, I wasn't going to plan on walking through each of the plan sheets or sidewalk segments in detail, but I'd be happy to take questions from the commission or speak to any of those changes that the staff is recommending.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Does anybody have any overarching comments or questions regarding the proposed changes? Seeing none. I guess, Jake, was there anything else you wanted to go over? I guess just the overall, well, obviously not every plan sheet, but any highlights?
No, not really. Because we changed so much of these recommended changes in that memo, I didn't feel it was appropriate to go through all these plan sheets because, you know, a half or a third of them aren't even going to be applicable as we move forward because we don't plan on constructing them, such as the Wakarusa segment.
Commissioner MMTC. Oh, yep.
I have some questions. The letter that's attached about the condition of Louisiana Street by the school, is that part of the Safe Routes?
No, I don't believe it's part of the Safe Route, but it is part of the Sidewalk Improvement Program currently under construction in that area. Mm-hmm. So those hazards should be addressed with the Sidewalk Improvement Program project.
Okay, and the other letters that came in, did you address those, right? Those were part of the changes?
Yes, those will be part of the changes. So those letters, I believe, specifically dealt with the sidewalk going in on West 20th Street. And this is one of those segments that was part of the existing Safe Routes to the School plan, but will not be part of the proposed changes. Essentially, 20th Street will no longer be on the Safe Route. And so it's staff recommendation to remove both the Tennessee and 20th Street sidewalk segments from this project. And I think we've identified a project on West 21st Street to, to take the place of those two projects.
I was really impressed at how rapidly responded to their concerns. Thank you.
Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. Yeah, I think that really speaks to that the city and staff are really not only have done so in the past, but are kind of improving methods of public engagement and truly listening to people, especially when they're these really like on the ground in your front yard kind of projects. So I appreciate the continuous improvement and hope that word of mouth gets out, because I still see a lot of media, social and otherwise, that it's a preordained thing. The city never listens to anything. Like, I don't know, not in our meetings. That's not true. So it's nice to see that it truly is kind of a back and forth guided experience here. So Anyway, any other comments from the commission?
This is Commissioner Bryan. Jake, I'm wondering, are we going to see this, like, as you take away the projects that are not going to be done, or are we going to, is this going to be brought back to us for review again? Or
I think it could be. This is Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer. Commissioner Bryan, I think we definitely have the opportunity to bring that back to the commission if that's your wish.
Okay, this is Commissioner Bryan. I would appreciate that. I feel like it's a little bit to try to sort through what's really going to happen versus what is now not going to happen. So one thing that I'm concerned about is I fully support the idea that if it's a low volume street, you know, a residential street, and it has one sidewalk, that's adequate for now. What I would want to do is make sure that we're not forcing kids to cross the street just to get on a sort of a segment that's on the opposite side. And I think, I don't know if the right term is for that, but I think Ashley had mentioned the word, or used the word continuous sidewalk or something to that effect. What I'm imagining is the approach we would take is one that says, if there's a continuous sidewalk on one side of the street, then that's adequate. But if you have to, you know, go down 4 blocks and then cross the street, and make, you know, 2 more blocks and then cross back, I don't feel like that's actually a continuous sidewalk on one side of the street. I would hope that we would distinguish that and try to address what I would think would be a gap. Like, I would rather see kids just stay on one side of the street and not cross back and forth just to get themselves to school. And I know that can be, in my area, that's Inverness is kind of built like that. So if you want to stay on the sidewalk, you got to cross the street a few times, and that's a collector street. So it's, you know, ideally would have sidewalks on both sides, but so I'm not sure, like in the stuff you have here, if that's ever the case where we have one side, but you actually have to jump back and forth to stay that way. Am I making sense?
Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer. Yes, I follow your logic completely.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Lauren.
I just have one quick clarifying question. I'm still kind of new to this. Could you clarify what exactly a field check means and what that means kind of in the whole process?
Certainly. Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer. So a field check is an engineering term for 30% plans. In the terms of this project, it's got KDOT funds in there. KDOT requires an actual field check of the design plans. So you hire your engineering consultant, they get your survey, and they do a preliminary design. I consider it like a rough draft of a book or a paper you're writing. Then KDOT, the city, and your engineer typically goes out in the field and walks all these proposed sidewalks to look for issues that the designer didn't see or something that you may want to change. In the instance of our field check, we recognized that there was not a lot of connectivity with the sidewalk ramps at the beginnings and terminations of these sidewalk segments. So that's one of the things we wanted to make sure and add it in when we proceed to our next phase of check plans.
This is Commissioner Bryan. Lauren, I'll just add one little piece to that. This is probably when we get to see it and the public gets to see something. It's very typically when it becomes more public, like a visual representation of the project. You know, the thing we saw earlier with the CIP, you know, that was just kind of like you're seeing the budget. This is the next step where you get to see maybe a representation of what this project looks like. So it can be really helpful for everybody, the public and us. And I don't think, Jake, that we see it again after this, right? Or can you help me understand that part?
Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer. So typically with a project like this, it's administered by KDOT. We have a field check set of plans. We may have an office check, a final check set of plans. And then those are different chances to review plans, 70%, 90%. So, I think in the past, we've typically brought the safe routes at field check. I don't know if we brought it at final design, but I'm hearing that's what we want to do for this one.
Yeah, Dave Cronin, city engineer. I would add that on a project like this, we typically wouldn't bring back the final plans, but I think with the plan changes that we're recommending, we will bring back probably not final plans, but close to final on the revisions we make. And if we, once we take a better look at the other locations we move to and the cost estimate, we may just put something on the agenda as an FYI on what we're looking at, just to keep things moving, because we do want to make our KDOT deadlines, but we will certainly bring back an update of these plans on this project. So.
Okay. If there are no final
thoughts, then I think we can close out this agenda item and possibly try to get some more final plans once they're ready before a future commission meeting. So thank you, Jake. And I think we will move on to staff items then. All right.
Do any staff have any items?
Dave Cronin, city engineer. I've got a couple things I did want to mention. I didn't get them on the agenda. The first is City Commission did approve the electric scooter ordinance on October the 6th. So that went through as we had, as you had reviewed and recommended earlier this year. So that got adopted. And during that meeting, a conversation transpired regarding bicyclists using the Kansas River Bridge sidewalks. In that e-scooter ordinance, we did recognize when putting that together that, you know, we kind of modeled the bicycle ordinance off, you know, the e-scooter ordinance off of what's legal for bicyclists. And we did notice that since the Kansas River bridges are in the downtown commercial district area, that technically it is right now not legal to bike on the Kansas River Bridge sidewalks. But the intent of the code is the sidewalks in downtown, like Mass Street, Vermont, New Hampshire, that you cannot bicycle on those sidewalks and not the Kansas River Bridge. So we are putting together an ordinance that resolves that technicality so that it will be legal to bike on the Kansas River Bridge sidewalks. And I think that ordinance is slated to go to the City Commission next week on the November 10th agenda. So just a FYI heads up, I know someone asked me about that late last week, and really it's just a technicality, but that resulted out of that meeting that we had when the e-scooter ordinance was approved. The other update I had was that we are moving forward with that 27th Street steering committee. I mentioned the project earlier in the CIP review for next year's projects. We had two transportation commissioners appointed to that committee. One was Commissioner Schartz and the other was Commissioner Allen. And Commissioner Schartz has indicated she's going to be not seeking reappointment to the MMTC going forward into next year, and we kind of discussed that as a possibility when we made the when you made the recommendation last month's meeting. But I would say I reached out to Commissioner Schartz about staying on the steering committee going into next year. I think due to the knowledge she has on the bicycling community and using those that bike out into the county, I think that's a good voice to have on that steering committee going forward. So she technically would not be representing the MMTC going forward into next year. but she's offered to stay on there, and I think that's a good thing. And in my opinion, I don't see the need that we really need to reappoint another person to the committee. But I will, if the board feels that they want another specific representation on there, let me know. You can give me your input, I guess now or at next month's meeting. But I think it's more of the representation on the steering committee than the numbers. So I don't think you necessarily have to, in my opinion, appoint another person. So it's kind of an update on that I wanted to get to you. We are, the RFQ is out, and really the next step is to get proposals back and then for a recommendation to go to the city commission with the scope and fee for that in probably mid to late December, and then the process would start in January. So is there any questions on that update from anyone?
Kuzmyak, MMTC chair, I would just say that I would reiterate what Dave was saying, in that I think even though Catherine would technically not be representing MMTC, for all intents and purposes, she's basically still would be, and also bring that bicycle knowledge. So I would fully support that continuation as well. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on it, if we need to move in a different direction or what, but I'm open.
Okay. Dave Cruntz, the engineer. Yeah, unless I hear dissenting opinion, that's the way we'll proceed. And then if you guys have any other thoughts between now and next month's meeting, please feel free to shout out.
Yeah. And thank you, Catherine, for agreeing to do a victory lap, basically. The bonus round.
That's all the staff updates that I had.
Okay. Thank you. MMTC Chair Nick Kuzmyak here. In that case, we'll move on to commission items. Does anybody have any commission items to bring up? We can always start with Carol. Oh, Aaron, looks like you're going first.
Aaron Payton, Commissioner. I had mentioned this to Charlie, but it's just an interesting discussion, and maybe Dave, I assume, looked at this, or somebody did. I'm not sure what city engineer, just said city engineer. But on last Wednesday, the Planning Commission, we voted on a variance request for sidewalk. A request to wait to develop a sidewalk on someone's property who's doing something. They're not actually building anything. They're actually combining two lots. And the deal was that we had a no protest for benefit district if the sidewalk needs to be or should be built later. And I guess I'm just kind of bringing it up because I was thinking about the role we might play in that, or if it's important, or kind of thoughts on Transportation Commission and their role. I mean, we don't vote on variances, but it is kind of an interesting thing to look at, because one of the things that came up so much in when I served on the Pedestrian Bicycles Use Task Force in the beginning of this was sidewalk. At the beginning of Multimodal Transportation Commission was sidewalk gaps, and things that are outside of town now, getting things like variance requests. And we've had a couple. I guess on I don't know if we've had any come to us. Like what would we do? I feel like we have. I feel like maybe Dave could answer that. Maybe we saw the. Or not. Maybe it's Planning Commission. I get confused. But just I don't know that we have a role in that so much as in just being able to advise and say, hey, you know, it's really important to look at these gaps that end up happening, because as much as it may be out of town and there's not much developed around there now, there eventually will be. On this particular case, I didn't think the threshold was pretty low for transportation, especially now, but it was just something I was kind of curious about, and I didn't know if it was maybe just a discussion that we could have on maybe whether it'd be interesting to weigh in on that, even if it's not by case, but more as a general thoughts. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that or concerns.
Commissioner Bowen? Actually, Aaron, I have a lot of thoughts on that. There are a lot of gaps in town, even along 23rd Street, because we allowed that to happen, and then there was resistance putting in the sidewalk. So you were right on. I don't know what we should do about it, but it should be our concern.
Commissioner Payton, again, and I think that the thing that this, which I thought was kind of, that this had was a no protest, you know, that the idea that the sidewalk might be formed later, or will be. But I also felt like that was kind of a imperfect solution, I guess.
This is Commissioner Bryan. Aaron, what was the justification for not doing it? Was it that it would cost too much, that it would deteriorate before they built everything? I mean, what's the rationale for not doing it? They're building the road, right?
No, road's already built. Aaron Payton, Commissioner, and this is why I voted against it, but I also don't know what my role is in talking about this and how that comes into play, but it wouldn't have, because there's already a sidewalk, and when that street was built, there was no policy for two sidewalks on either side of the street. And this particular lot, so this is all the stuff I didn't talk to Charlie. I kind of asked him a couple questions because I was trying to remember some stuff about benefit districts, which I'm not going to go into, but or discussions we had with the Pedestrian Bicyclist Use Task Force on benefit districts. And anyway, stuff I don't need to go into right now. This particular lot has 3 sides that would have sidewalks. So it's kind of unusual because that doesn't happen very often, and it's combining 2 lots. And so I really just am bringing it up because I want to think about those variance requests in general. The last one was in reference to the new hospital, and I think we didn't approve it, but I would have to go back and look. And so it's really more of a discussion on, you know, when is that important and when is it not? Because I just think that that's what we want to, in this case, I really feel like it passed and it wasn't that big a deal. But sometimes I think, sometimes I think it's really important to consider those things because we see a lot of gaps in Lawrence. And I think a lot of those gaps happen just because, you know, it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. And then 10 years later, it becomes something that you're like, man, we really wish we had a sidewalk there now, and we have to find the money to fill the gap. So, but this particular case, there's no development request. There's no plans, building or anything on the property. It's actually combining 2 properties, one that's already there and making the backyard bigger. So I didn't think it was, you know, something that was at the threshold for necessarily not granting that. But I think that it's just a discussion that would be worth having.
This is Kuzmyak, MMTC Chair. That sounds like a really good potential discussion topic for a joint MMTC and Planning Commission committee, which segues into a quick thing I wanted to ask of Dave. Have you gotten any traction yet with Jeff Crick on potentially assembling a small joint committee of that sort?
Dave Cronin, City Engineer. I have not. But I did want to speak real briefly to Commissioner Payton's question, and that we do, on those requests, to look at them very seriously. And I'm not real familiar with the one that you're referencing, but on a small scale where you're combining two lots or making minor modifications on one lot that could be on a residential street that doesn't have sidewalk on that side of the street, would be those sorts of isolated locations are candidates to have that language, as far as not requiring it, but having an agreement not to protest that it goes in the future. So, but we all make a note of that we could discuss that maybe at a future study session meeting, and then if it would most appropriate, I think, to discuss with the Planning Commission too, if we're able to get that back together. So I've made a note of that, and if you have any questions on any of those items that go to the Planning Commission as far as variance requests and the rationale, please reach out.
Aaron Payton, Commissioner. And had I read my packet earlier, Dave, I probably would have called you about it that day. Not so much for that, but to sort of talk to you about those kinds of things in general. But I was a little behind that day, so I was reading that pretty late.
This is Commissioner Bryan. This makes me think about on my side of town, Overland Drive is a good example where the sidewalk just basically ends because Queens Road was never built. And I don't know, this is where you can never kind of understand what's going to happen in the future. So every time I drive down Overland Drive, I see people walking, and they're basically going to hit the end of the sidewalk, and then they're going to be on dirt. If you're driving, there's not a problem because there's a paved road right there. But it just seems like there should have been a continuation of that sidewalk all the way across. And it wouldn't have been very much further to just keep the sidewalk going. And if that can't happen, at the very least, there ought to have been like a way to cross the street where the sidewalk ends. Instead, the sidewalk just kind of stops. And it just seems odd. So I think this definitely should be some further discussion. And it also, to me seems like maybe we need to think about whether the complete streets policy should clarify kind of the process for making exceptions, which would include variances to the sidewalk requirements. I don't know that has to be all that sophisticated. It could just be merely the variances to the complete streets policy or the subdivision regulations need to come, before us for our input before a decision is made by the Planning Commission or by the City Commission. We don't necessarily need authority in it. We just might need kind of a step in the process to inform their decision. And it provides maybe the public a chance to kind of make note of, oh, there's an exception coming. And, MMTC is going to see it, put their recommendation on it, and then it gets decided on by the PC or the Planning Commission or City Commission. Thanks.
Carol.
Are we still having the forum that we were planning with the community?
That is going to be on the next part of our agenda, which is calendar. So yes, and there will be more details then.
Okay. Well, I'm still struggling with this whole, I'm kind of glad that the dog park issue did not come up. I wish it had come up to our commission, but it didn't. So I figure that means I can say what I want. And basically what I heard was some drivers who happen to congregate on a certain season. I think soccer's in the fall, isn't it? And afternoons and weekends, we pay attention to their needs, but we did not pay any attention initially to the needs of the pedestrians and the cyclists. And when we do bring up the needs of pedestrians and cyclists, it's, well, we don't have enough data. So we don't need data to make things more convenient for drivers, but we do need data for pedestrians and cyclists. We're not approaching things in a multimodal fashion. For example, I know for a fact that 3 people have died at Lawrence Avenue and Clinton Parkway. But I don't hear anything about, oh, geez, we need to fix that. Or there's a whole bunch of people downtown who cross from the bus stop to the library mid-block. But we can't do anything because of the vehicles. We are not addressing these in a comprehensive way. And I just had to bring that up again.
Carol, I think that that's a really good thing that we need to be talking with the Planning Commission as well, because, land use and transportation are so interrelated that I think once they realize that the land use of, Vermont between 6th and 7th is pretty intense, and there's a lot of people who are on foot around there, that maybe the transportation needs to be changed. But I don't really know where to go with that statement necessarily. Just that if there's maybe more coordination, then we could get all the potential stakeholders, both on citizen boards and in the government, on, kind of on the same page, and see if we can actually move something forward. Because at this point, the way I'm envisioning it is that, imagine what the actual solution is. Making it a pedestrianized street like a Woonerf, right? Like a Dutch Woonerf. The amount of backlash that would cause in our car-centric city would be incredible. So I feel that in order to truly make progress on these things, that you're right, do have enough data at this point, anecdotal though it may be, to act upon. I don't know how we're going to approach them without raising 90% of the city's red flags. So I guess what I'm saying is I like where you're going, and I want to go there too, but I don't yet know the strategy that we can take to start to think more holistically about streets for everyone. So I don't know.
Aaron Payton, Commissioner. I was just kind of curious, 2 things. Streets for everyone, like you said, we have to start thinking of planning our cities a little more densely so that that's more possible. But when you said, well, never mind. I was going to ask about if you were referring to a specific street when you said a Woonerf.
Not here necessarily, but for anybody who doesn't know that term, I guess it's kind of going into more wonky territory. But a Woonerf is the Dutch name for a street where basically there's a separation by speed, but not by class of vehicle. So in the U.S., we tend to separate our streets by class of vehicle. So bikes go in this lane, people walk in this lane, cars go in this lane, and in some spots, buses have their own separate lane. In countries like the Netherlands and actually Japan as well, they separate by speed. So certain streets that are high speed keep all the trucks and buses on the actual asphalt part of the roadway, and then sidewalks are for both pedestrians and bikes because they're close enough in speed. But then you got neighborhood streets that aren't separated by grade at all. It's the same grade the entire way across, sometimes with lines to kind of suggest where you might want to stand if you're a pedestrian, but otherwise they truly are meant for everybody. If you ever want a virtual trip, go to Tokyo on Google Maps and go into Street View. It's not the neon metropolis you might think it is. It's very tight streets, and there's people, vans, cars, bikes, wheelchair users. Everybody using the exact same street at the same time, and it's wild. But it only works for slow streets that are constrained enough, both physically and kind of aesthetically, to make that possible. So I would say at this point, kind of the Dutch and the Japanese are really at the forefront of doing that intentionally. But any old city is really good at that just because they don't have the room for high-speed traffic. Lawrence is not old enough to really have that issue. So it would have to be very intentional to get in that direction. So anyway, Any other commission items? If not, I have one to close us out with. So let me get back to my notes page here. So for kind of a fun diversion, if anybody is looking for a new book to read, I picked one up at the Friends of the Library before I was on MMTC, so I didn't really recognize its importance until I finally finished a couple of other books. It's called Traffic, and it came out about 12 years ago, and it's by a guy who kind of went on a vision quest of, why does it seem like everybody's a bad driver? Why do I hate driving so much? Why do drivers hate cyclists so much? And he really tried to dive into a lot of empirical research that was being done around the world at the time to try to figure out the psychology of driving, which is a study session topic that Carol has brought up a couple times, and also the engineering and encouragement and enforcement that can lead to the outcomes that we actually want and how it's practiced in countries where they're actually successful at it. So it looks fascinating. I'm halfway through the first chapter and my notes page is filling up like crazy. So it's going to be a slow read because I'll actually have to use this information. But a quick tidbit just to kind of give you an idea of what's in there. They talk about the psychology of driving and note that when we're driving, we are victims of the fundamental attribution error, which is when we ascribe the actions of others to who they are, not the circumstances that may have forced that action. So if you're ever driving and somebody cuts you off or does something really stupid, and then you look in the window like, of course it's a millennial texting on the cell phone, right? That's why they did that. Maybe. Or maybe there's somebody else who cut them off and they were forced to cut you off. And that's the actor-observer effect in that, we ascribe our own actions to the circumstances that led to those actions. We don't say, well, I'm a 33-year-old white cisgendered male. Of course I would do that kind of thing. Duh. It's a very different kind of, it's projection basically. And it's a fascinating study of psychology. But I think in Lawrence, the kind of, and I guess other cities that have conflicts between bikes and cars, the kind of thing that leads to in real life is that if you see a bike do anything stupid, which does happen, immediately you think, well, they did that because they're a biker. So now all bikers are bad, which if you've read any comment section on any article about bike lanes or bike boulevards, it kind of shows the fundamental attribution error in its full glory. So anyway, that's just one of the many kind of interesting vignettes I've come across so far. So if you are looking for a good book to read, Traffic is the one that you want to pick up. I think it's really applicable to what we do here on MMTC. So anyway, that's that for me. I think we're ready to move on to calendar. So what Carol was alluding to is the Your Turn session that we're going to have is sort of a forum, open-ended discussion, and it's something new we're going to try. So it's too bad Steve's not here because I believe this was his idea to begin with. But the idea is that we get a decent amount of public comment at our meetings, and we get a decent amount of comments submitted via email and in Lawrence Listen surveys. But it would possibly be useful to kind of hear a little bit more detail of what certain representatives of stakeholder groups have to say. So for example, somebody who represents cyclists in town, it would be good to hear from them what role do they see the MMTC having in what they do? How have we done so far? And what are we totally missing the mark on? I think it would be a decent way to generate a couple of discussion topics for any retreat that we have coming up in February. And just kind of a way to dive a little bit deeper into, kind of how the public interacts with us and see if we can improve, basically. So the initial groups that have been kind of thrown out at this point are Sustainability Action Network. So Michael Lawman, for example, who could comment on a couple things. Live Well Lawrence often comes to our meetings and has comments. And then I'd also thought that perhaps the Chamber of Commerce would be a decent guest to invite as well, because they look at transportation from a very different angle from the rest of us. So issues with commuting or freight or long distance travel or loading and unloading parking, they have probably a very different view of how transportation works than most of us. And then finally, I'm hoping to invite somebody from the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods as well to kind of get a neighborhood perspective on that. And it's going to be hard because not one person has lived in every neighborhood, but I think we can get close probably. So those are the four groups that have been tossed around at this point. Does anybody have any others that they think would be a really good fit that we're totally missing here?
like the health department, perhaps. I don't know.
This is Commissioner Bryan. I was actually thinking about transit.
Hmm.
I don't know who, but maybe you're more familiar with that group since you're on PTAC.
Yeah, I'm thinking that somebody like Heather Tice might be a really good fit because
yeah,
somebody
this
who
is her
yeah.
term comes up, right? She's going to term out next
Yeah.
month. So Heather would be a really great person, I think, to speak to us.
I agree. Possibly somebody from Parks and Rec, even people who are really into things like the Lawrence Loop and shared use paths, that could help as well. So anyway, it's only an hour for him, so we can't pack it too full. I'm thinking if we can settle on 4, that'd probably be good. So anyway, those conversations are kind of going on in the background with Carol and myself and Dave to try to figure out a roster and an organization for this that makes sense. But if anybody does have any additional input or ideas, feel free to shoot me an email. I think that the other thing on the agenda that we're going to have to talk about at some point is the retreat. We usually do these in person, but that is probably not going to happen. So, Dave, I don't know if we've really thought about this that much yet. Do you already have some ideas in mind?
Dave Cronin, city engineer.
I don't. I mean, I think it's probably unlikely that we would get together in person in January or February, and we need to start thinking about that. I think the December meeting, we need to get a calendar for next year and then get a subcommittee together to plan on having a retreat in some fashion, probably virtually, and how we would do that. So I think that we'll discuss that next month and then hopefully get a little group together to brainstorm how to do that. I think it's been good in the past, and I think we can do it virtually, and other projects and plans and are going forward virtually, so we should still strive to do that in January or February. So
okay. Nick Kuzmyak, MMTC chair. The other thing that's kind of came to mind recently is that usually we elect a new chair and vice chair around the time of the retreat. I never seem to know exactly when that happens, but I feel like it's soon. So is that something that needs to be on the agenda for December or maybe January?
We should be electing the chair and vice chair at the first meeting in 2021. So I don't know if we do meet in January, which could be ahead of the retreat, then we would do that election at that time. So we can discuss that further next month.
Okay.
And just depending on the schedule and if we want to meet in January or not.
Okay, sounds good. Anybody have any further comments, questions on the agenda? Other last minute burning questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
It's Commissioner Bryan. Move that we adjourn.
Commissioner Schartz, I second.
First by Charlie, second by Catherine. Allie, can you please call a final roll?
Allie Weems, MSO. Catherine?
Aye.
Lauren?
Aye.
Thomas?
Aye.
Charlie?
Aye.
Donna?
Aye.
Carol?
Aye.
Nick?
Aye.
And Aaron?
Aye.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for a productive meeting. We are now adjourned, and we'll see you next month.
Aye.
Aye.